Chapter 135. In the silence, there was only a soft sound like a ball rolling. A head with a dagger nailed to it fell from the sky and rolled in a pool of blood. Finally, it stopped and stared blankly at the crack in the ceiling. Under the countless traces of blood, the wall's floor, and everything had been changed beyond recognition. Two broken bodies fell to the ground with a muffled sound, revealing the dark figure in the middle of them. Huaisher shook off the blood on the axe and put away the weapon on the ground. Then, he quickly walked to Hila and cut the rope on her hand. Hila looked at him in shock and disbelief. "You're here to save me? No, you have to run by yourself." Huaisher shoved a rope into Hila's hand and pulled her to the opening in the ventilation duct. She pointed at the opening above. "Go left and go down to the corridor. Take the rope and crawl out through the window. Then go to the deck. If there are people, hide there for a while. I'll make a big commotion to attract their attention. After you escape into the passenger area, go to room 1011. Here's the key. You can hide there." That was Yujune's room. Now that Yujune was dead, no one would go there. It was the perfect place for her to hide. Hila looked at him blankly, as if she still did not understand what had happened. Huaisher shook his head and sighed. He grabbed her hand and was about to send her up, but then he could not help but be stunned. He felt as if he had grabbed a pile of mud. Her hand melted in his palm. Then he felt a chill on his back. He looked down and saw a knife sticking out of his chest. "Unfortunately, you saved the wrong person." Behind him, Hila laughed mockingly. Her face flowed down like mud and fell to the ground, turning into stinky river mud. Behind the river mud, an ugly face covered with old wrinkles and spots appeared. He had never seen it before. However, with the disturbance of the mud, the stench disappeared, and the face slowly healed as if it had recovered its youth. Then it became lively and beautiful, without any signs of aging. Spring demon. Huaisher suddenly understood. The witch hiding in the stagnant water in Norse legends, the wanton and cruel demon. "You are..." Huaisher looked at the woman in shock. "Who are you?" Thus, the smug face became distorted. She suddenly pulled back her hand, pulled out the dagger, and allowed Huaisher to fall to the ground. Then, she raised her foot and angrily stepped on Huaisher's face. "Eleanor, Lady Eleanor, you'd better remember this, you bastard." She suppressed her anger, and her beautiful fake face twisted in anger. "Damn it, I should have been a noble countess. I should have. Damn it, how'd I end up in the same boat as you bumpkins?" Huaisher coughed violently. She stepped on his face, and he vomited blood. "I knew something was wrong. I knew you were up to no good, you little bastard. I knew it." The woman who called herself Madame Eleanor gritted her teeth and spat a mouthful of stinking phlegm on the ground. "I caught you. You really did hook up with that little bitch, didn't you?" She reached out and pulled open the door of the cold storage. She pulled the shivering girl out and violently threw her on the ground. Then, she pulled her hair and pulled her up. She held her face and made her look at Huaisher on the ground. "Look who's here. My little baby." She laughed sharply. "I guessed right, didn't I? There are always fools attracted by your young and beautiful face. They're like mosquitoes buzzing around the flame. How smug, how stylish. Ah, this feels pretty good, doesn't it?" Hila's lips were bruised from the cold, and she could no longer speak. She could only look at Huaisher in shock. On the ground, Huaisher awkwardly squeezed out a smile at her. "Ah, we meet again." Asterisk slap. Asterisk the sprite impatiently bent down and slapped Huaisher. She pulled Hila's hair and looked at her delicate face with jealousy. "My patience is over, little bitch. Since you're not willing to speak with a kind attitude, let's be violent. It's useless. You're too old." Hila looked at the sprite with pity. "Even if you have my blood, you won't be able to regain your youth." "Shut up," the sprite screamed. Her expression became ferocious and twisted. The layer of mud on her face cracked. "Give it to me. Give me your blood. Don't play tricks. Give me your blood willingly, baby, and I'll fulfill your wish, just like in fairy tales." This was a vicious fairy tale that had once been circulated all over the world. It was about the transactions between witches and ignorant girls, such as the Daughter of the Sea, and all the other girls who overestimated themselves and did not know what they were getting, thinking that they could fulfill their wishes if they got something. The result was no doubt. All the ignorant traders were skinned alive and devoured by the witches, leaving only regret. Ever since King Arthur died tragically in the sword fence, no one would believe that the woman who came out of the spring had kindness. After all, no one would believe that a wet woman gave you a rusty sword and you could become a king, right? What can you give me? Gila asked. Freedom? Oh, my dear, I can let you go, if you can. The sprite grinned and pointed the knife at Huaishi's face. Or I can spare his life. How about it? In the silence, Gila was silent. She just looked at Huaishi's face. After a long time, she looked down. You swear, she said. Of course I swear. The sprite laughed excitedly. I swear to all living water that I won't kill him. Now give me blood. Immediately. All of it. As soon as she finished speaking, she felt someone pulling her. Huaishi was lying on the ground. In the pool of blood, Huaishi struggled to reach out and pull her skirt. His lips opened and closed, and he spat out blood foam in a violent cough, trying to make sound. What's going on? The last confession? So cute. Spring Demon laughed sharply. He bent down and looked at Meng Qi's embarrassed appearance. Then he vaguely heard Huaishi's voice. Elephant, elephant? What elephant? She frowned in confusion and listened carefully. Then she heard the man on the ground whispering in a hoarse voice. She didn't know if it was sleep talking or singing, but the tune was strange. Elephant, elephant. He was singing softly, singing a children's song that she didn't know how to put together. In the end, his voice was getting weaker and weaker. Your neck, why is it so long? At that moment, the sprite looked down in shock and saw Huaishi's scarlet eyes in the pool of blood. For canine teeth were slowly growing out of his mouth. Then, the tune became cruel and violent. It was like an angry elephant finally couldn't stand the dead child's nagging. It impatiently raised its foot and kicked the child to death on the spot, and then spat on the corpse. Damn it, Gonli, I'm a giraffe. She felt a chill. At that moment, Huaishi on the ground suddenly bounced up. He opened his mouth and bit the sprite's neck, penetrating the artery and crazily sucking the substance that represented life. You want blood, don't you? What a coincidence, I want it too. That feeling was indescribably intoxicating. It was like drinking sweet dew. It was obviously stinky blood, but the moment it entered the mouth, it made people feel happy as if they had ascended to heaven. But the sprite screamed in pain. The scream was drowned in her throat, and her life was quickly fading away. Under the nourishment of the blood, the vampire's stigmata became more active than ever. It quickly repaired Huaishi's body, and even made him stronger and more agile. It was like a ghost that was stuffed with the dust of the liberated. When drinking the blood, the vampire's stigmata could be truly complete and truly awaken. He had truly obtained that forbidden power. Above the 4 canine teeth, runes inlaid with pure silver slowly emerged, purifying all dark species equally. Not only the sprite, but also Huaishi. This was the strongest weapon of the demon hunter, Van Helsing. Relying on the vampire's characteristic of devouring life, he gave the enemy an irresistible purification, and then used the blood he drank to repair his body and maintain his integrity. In just a moment, cracks appeared on half of the sprite's body. She could no longer wear the disguise of youth, revealing her old and shriveled appearance. She screamed in pain and struggled hard. Ignoring her neck being torn, she forcibly pushed Huaishi away. But there was a huge crack on her neck, and blood kept gushing out. You! She stared at Huaishi crazily, opened her mouth, and roared silently, calling for her husband. Then, the door was suddenly pushed open, and the dull man guarding outside rushed in. With every step forward, his body expanded. After 3 steps, he completely turned into the legendary bloodthirsty and tyrannical Cyclops. Then he found a huge hole in his chest, and the heart that had been plucked out. Bang! The giant fell to the ground. The person holding the heart slowly closed the door, not letting the noisy crowd outside know what was happening in the kitchen. Huaishi raised his hand and crooked his finger at the sprite. The crossbow arrow tied to his arm burst out with a sharp whistle and completely penetrated the sprite's head. It completely blew up the pile of mud. To be honest, Huaisher couldn't remember her name in the end. But when he turned around and prepared to fight the giant, he saw the corpse on the ground and Yin leaning against the door, weighing the rotten heart in his hand. Yin sneered and threw the thing aside. He looked at the stunned Huaisher. The moment the man rushed in, Yin, who had been hiding for a long time, suddenly attacked from behind. With his sharp claws, he dug out the heart of the zombie giant. But why him? Are you out of your mind? Huaisher asked in shock. Yin glanced at him coldly. Why don't you ask your magical little conch? What's going on? Huaisher asked Ai Qing, who was hiding in his mind. The magical little conch, Ai Qing, suddenly didn't want to talk to him. Chapter 136. Do you still need to ask? Ai Qing sneered. My cousin is afraid, isn't he? He's in a hurry to find someone to form an alliance with. Huaisher looked at Yin and asked seriously, why me? At least you're more conscientious than my cousin, and you're less like a traitor than the others. Is this reason enough? Yin asked. From the beginning, he knew that Huaisher was definitely going to do something. Relying on his divine mark, he hid here and witnessed the whole process. He knew that Huaisher's actions didn't seem to be fake, and then he appeared. One of you is a vampire, and the other is a believer. Hey, what the Holy Spirit lineage wants to do on the ship has nothing to do with me, and my secret has nothing to do with you. Yin asked, I'll help you, and you help me. How about that? Alliance? Huaisher asked cautiously. To be honest, compared to others, I don't trust your family's magical conch more. Yin said indifferently. We can't form an alliance, but if we do, it's one more insurance. Don't let go. Ai Qing seemed to see what he was hiding behind his indifferent face. He's here to ask for help. Force him to take out something. Seeing Huaisher's serious face, Yin asked, if I'm not wrong, she should be asking you to put on a negotiating face to deal with me, right? Huaisher was silent. He felt that he had become a platform for the siblings to fight. It doesn't matter. I have a free information for you. Yin said calmly. Last night, I hid at the entrance of the warehouse and saw with my own eyes that Lei Feizhou and others worked together to chop off Yujun's head. How about it? Is this information important enough? As he spoke, he enjoyed the stunned expression on Huaisher's face and showed a mocking smile. You're not the only one who's become capable these years, sister. This title always sounded meaningful, and it was hard to tell whether it was affectionate or resentful. What do you want? Ai Qing asked directly. How about you help me kill that old man, Kush? Yin suddenly said. No. Huaisher conveyed Ai Qing's answer. The price you want is too high. Until now, he still hadn't reacted, and he couldn't figure out whether this was Yin's trick or his true purpose. He was even a little skeptical about the news he had told him. You just have to help when necessary. How about it? Yin said. Before that, just don't get in the way. Do you agree? Huaisher asked. Of course, why not? Ai Qing said calmly. At worst, we'll just go back on our word. You guys are all dirty when it comes to tactics. Huaisher nodded helplessly. Very good. Yin looked at him deeply. I will come to you when necessary. He took a step back, and his figure disappeared. He only saw the door open and close. After the previous incident, he seemed to have learned his lesson and didn't leave any traces for Huaisher to track. Huaisher didn't even know if he was still in this room. However, there wasn't much time left. He sighed and reached out his hand. Let's go. We need to leave this place quickly. Hila stared at him for a long time. It was only when Huaisher couldn't wait any longer that she grabbed Huaisher's hand. Let's go, she said. Huaisher waved his arm and threw her into the ventilation duct. After a short crawling forward, Huaisher suddenly heard a faint voice in front of him. Thank you. You're welcome. He subconsciously looked up and saw the sole of a shoe rapidly enlarging in front of his eyes and kicking his face. Don't look. Okay. Only then did Huaisher remember that she was wearing a dress. He quickly lowered his head and pretended not to see anything as he crawled forward. Soon, the ventilation duct came to an end. Hila jumped down. In the silence, Huaisher sighed, wiped the shoe print on his face, and jumped down. Then, he froze on the spot. He saw the youth leaning against the wall in front of the broken porthole and the blood spreading to his feet. An orange cat sat quietly in the pool of blood, bent down, and slowly licked the corpse that still had the aura of life just a moment ago. He took his time eating his meal. Gila. It was as if she had been torn apart. Before she landed, she had already been shattered into several pieces. Her pale face stared blankly at the crack in the ceiling. Until the last moment, until death, there was still a smile on her lips that Huaishur had never seen before. It was gentle like the morning dew, so light that it was about to evaporate under the sun. Huaishur looked away and didn't dare to look again. He raised his head and looked at the pharaoh from Egypt. The pharaoh was also looking at him with a smile that was not only caring, but also mocking. I see that you seem to have been held hostage by that woman. It's okay to come over and help, right? In a long silence, Huaishur clenched and unclenched his fists. After a long time, he raised his head and smiled gratefully. No. He lowered his head deeply. Thank you for your help, Your Excellency. That's good. Ha ha ha. The pharaoh enjoyed his grateful look and laughed happily. He waved at the cat on the ground. Let's go, Sphinx. The cat reluctantly licked the blood that was still warm, then turned around and left with its owner. Only Huaishur still stood where he was, maintaining his bowing posture of gratitude. After a long, long time, he said softly, Ai Ching, I must kill him. When Huaishur returned to the scene, the trial had already ended. Not long after, someone discovered that the prisoner tried to escape and was killed by the pharaoh himself. Although no one could sentence Gila to death in the name of the Dark World, no one was bold enough to run to the pharaoh and say that it was too disappointing. Everyone hadn't had a good time yet. The dark creatures were definitely experts at bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Moreover, after being surrounded and suppressed by the Holy Spirit lineage for so many years, those with noble morals had probably all died long ago. The Pope that often appeared in novels was a bad ghost, and the dark creatures were all heroes. Most of the time, things that happened would not appear. They were just a group of frightened birds, and they were even scared out of their wits. When they saw a believer appear on the ship, they screamed and wanted to call for their mother. Would a new world really give them a place to stay? Huaishur took a deep look at the empty courtroom and turned to leave. She turned around and returned to her room. When he pushed open the door, he couldn't help but hold his breath. Sorry, that room is a little dirty, so I came to your place. On the chair in front of the window, the girl who was reading looked up. Her silver hair shone with a metallic glow under the oil lamp. It was Gila. Huaishur looked at her in a daze. His lips opened, but he didn't know what to say. You're not. It's just a double body trick. Gila tilted her head and looked at him. Haven't you seen it before? Double body, doppelganger. It meant that two people with similar appearances could be directly understood as double bodies or double existences. Simply put, it was the phenomenon of two people who were exactly the same. From memory to appearance, there was no difference at all. It was difficult to tell them apart. From Egypt to Rome, similar rumors could be found everywhere, and the terrifying legends that were derived from it were countless. For those who ascended, this was a rare technique. Usually, only scholars would try to study this trick of placing the soul mirror image in a puppet. After all, very few people could multitask and control two bodies at the same time. Moreover, materials that matched their soul attributes were often too rare, and it was troublesome to create. Due to the innate limitations of the materials, it could not even provide stronger combat power. It was just a puppet that could conveniently do two things at the same time. There were even more convenient alternatives. Therefore, except for few fields, very few people would study these things. Huaishur stared at Gila in front of him in shock. He could not help but step forward and carefully touch her shoulder. You're really not dead? As if not used to this kind of intimate contact, Gila could not help but frown. If you don't mind, I can step on you again. I promise it's the same size as the shoe print on your face. No need, no need. Huaishur could not help but reach out to wipe his face, but after wiping for a long time, he could not see any dirt or ashes. Only then did he see Gila's smile that was as light as dew. He coughed a few times, sat by the bed, and carefully asked, Then, are we considered friends? Not really. Hila shook her head and said calmly, "After leaving this ship, we'll be strangers. There's no need to establish such a close relationship." She said, "As long as we're not friends, anything is fine." Huaishir was confused. "If you become my friend, I'll have to start being wary of you." She stared into Huaishir's eyes and told him as if she was telling him the truth. "Otherwise, you'll betray me when I trust you the most." Huaishir did not know who taught her such hardcore logic, so he could only nod helplessly. "Okay, ally, okay." No matter what, being an ally was a good thing. At least it seemed more reliable than his teammates who were all like traitors. "Then what's your name?" Hila asked seriously. "As allies, we should first tell each other our names, right?" Huaishir. Huaishir hesitated for a moment before saying his real name. "As you can see, I'm a vegetarian vampire." Hila did not say anything, only looking straight at him as if she was trying to tell if he was lying. After a long time, she nodded in satisfaction. "Lily," she said. "You can call me Lily." "Lily, not Hila?" Huaishir was stunned. "HL is my registered name." Hila raised the heavy ancient book in her hand. "It's a rule among scholars. When I'm doing something as a scholar, I have to tell others this name. But as a partner, you can call me Lily." Chapter 137. Registered name, or in other words, magic name. Just like how sorcerers in the legends had all kinds of nicknames and names, scholars who focused on research would receive a name that only existed in endless knowledge when they started their apprenticeship. It was either given by a mentor or searched for on their own. Whether it was in life or after death, it would always exist as a personal symbol, so it was often entrusted with special meaning and power. There were even legends about true names. Even after some scholars died, their names still existed in their formulas, just like pericusal. As long as the special alloy represented by this name was added to the formula, the metal's activity would increase by 3%. The legendary creator at the top of the pyramid of scholars. Their names themselves were a kind of magic that existed in matter. For example, Newton's name had long been written into the bottom of the great arcanum Zarathustra and became a part of the law of the present. The 3 laws that he wrote down have been imprinted everywhere in the present. Compared to this, Huaishir was even more surprised that the girl in front of him was a scholar, which was rarer than a sublimator. In fact, alchemists could also be classified as scholars, but later on, they separated on their own and formed the Stone Cauldron Society. They were no longer controlled by the pioneers, an organization of scholars. Strictly speaking, whether it was a scholar or an alchemist, in fact, their status was higher than that of a sublimator. After all, it was a technical profession which was innately monopolized. Unlike a sublimator who worked physically, those who worked mentally were born to be in the upper class. To others, the profession of scholar was essentially no different from that of mage. If it were somewhere else, Huaishir might have to put on a smiling face and call Lily master to let her take a look. After all, scholars with a registered name had at least mastered more than one law, which was more than one kind of magic. As a profession that was better at creating than destroying, it was natural for scholars to be more respected. However, this also explained why Lily chose to go to the New World. After all, from the early 16th century to the Second Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, it was a dark period where the Holy Spirit genealogy constantly suppressed scholars. After all, the laws adhered to by the Holy Spirit genealogy were fundamentally different from the laws adhered to by the scholars. The contradiction between creationism and the theory of evolution was more than just a little, and the harbingers had been rejected by the church for more than a day or two. The pioneer society could no longer stay in Rome. They had exiled themselves to the 6 Isles of London, which was still a remote place at that time, and had been there ever since. It was not until the split of the Holy Spirit lineage in 1740 and the Industrial Revolution led by the scholars began to flourish that the offensive of both sides reversed and the harbingers took over the mainstream. This led to the birth of the Astronomical Society, which later controlled the entire world. Before this, all the scholars were considered heretics. However, they hadn't openly fallen out with each other, but the battle in private had gradually heated up. A scholar staying in Rome was like Archimedes squatting at home, waiting for the Romans to kick down his door. It was unwise. They could be doing research at home, but one day they would be hung on a stake. It was not surprising that they wanted to leave. Van Helsing still had several experiences of assassinating famous scholars in his memory. Out of respect for the scholar's profession and Lily's privacy, Huaisher did not ask in detail about the subjects she studied and the laws she mastered. Anyway, except for the typical system of mechanics, most of the other scholars' laws were useless in a fight. After understanding the general situation, he nodded, picked up the coat on the bed, and put it on again. Then, before we reach the new world, you can hide here. Take it as a reward for saving me during the day. No need to refuse. Huaisher said, I'll rest in Yujune's room. When I find food on the ship tomorrow, I'll send it to you. Be careful, it's not safe here. Thinking of old Shaw who died in his room, Huaisher's heart could not help but sink. If I were you, I wouldn't choose to go out at this time. Lily looked at him with a strange look against the seemingly eternal night outside the window. After nightfall, it's now hell outside. Huh? Huaisher was a loss. What happened? During the day, the poison in the food in the restaurant. Out of curiosity, I collected some samples and used your alchemy equipment to test it. Lily raised her finger, and there was a test tube between her fair fingertips. A wisp of grayish-black color floated in the colorless liquid, like a wisp of black cotton wadding, slowly swimming in the liquid. Out of respect for our relationship as allies and for my personal safety, I have to ask first, have you eaten the food in the restaurant? If you have eaten it, do you have any cases of gastric ulcers or gastrointestinal bleeding? No. Huaisher shook his head frantically. That bowl of thick soup was disgusting. How did he dare to eat it? Moreover, as a vampire, he could survive as long as he had blood. He had just eaten a full meal on the body of the spring demon. He estimated that he could last for many days. In order to prevent the poison in his blood, his canine teeth had a purification holy seal. Once he sucked blood, he would burn himself, let alone other things. As for gastric ulcers and gastrointestinal bleeding, that was even more impossible. That's good. Lily breathed a sigh of relief and slowly put down the book in her other hand. What exactly is this? Huaisher asked. In essence, this is a powerful viral stimulant. Lily shook the test tube in her hand slightly. It is afraid of light and heat. It has a tenacious vitality. The speed of cell division is abnormally fast. It can infect almost all living things. As a virus, it has unimaginable activity. Once it enters the spinal cord through the blood circulation, it will quickly spread. In 4 hours, the immune system will be paralyzed. After 6 hours, it will spread in the brain, disrupting the hormone balance of the human body. It will stimulate the secretion of large amounts of adrenaline and dopamine, forcing people into a state of excitement. At the same time, they will enter a state of hunger that cannot be dispelled. In the end, even the source substance will be contaminated by it. It will collapse in the high heat, stimulating all of the host's strength and forcing the body to undergo mutation and organ proliferation. Are you sure this thing is not the T virus? Huaisher was dumbstruck. This description is completely talking about zombies. I don't know what the T virus you're talking about is, but if it's a zombie, then it's not wrong. After all, it really is one of the origins of all the living dead type legends in the world. Lily calmly said, compared to the so-called T virus, I'd rather use a more professional term to call it, wolfbane. In that instant, Huaisher finally came to a realization and couldn't help but grit his teeth. Lei, Fei, Zhou. That guy had been lying from the very beginning. What werewolf? That guy was clearly a Leakin. Ignoring the fact that he was also full of lies from the beginning, Huaisher was suddenly filled with resentment towards that traitor Lei Feizhou. Werewolf and Leakin. These two terms seemed to only have the order switched, but in reality, they came from two completely different words. The so-called werewolves generally referred to the calamities and miracles that originated from Greece, monsters that were cursed by the gods and turned from humans into wolves. Starting from King Lycaon, all the citizens of Arcadia had the element of wolf transformation planted in their blood. Once they attempted to sublimate, they would become monsters that couldn't tolerate light. Lichens were completely different. They were usually used to describe wolf-type abyssal creatures that took on the appearance of humans. It could be traced back to many wolf-type monsters and holy creatures in legends. They were usually considered to be the mortal bloodline of some wolf-type deity. It was like the difference between curry that smelled like dog poop and curry that smelled like dog poop. Even if they looked similar, they were two completely different things from the beginning. The most obvious characteristic of the latter, apart from its extremely rare quantity, was its body fluid that could be called a mobile source of infection. In legends, where lichens lived, a large amount of wolf head grass would grow. Alchemists harvested this kind of wisteria-like plant and could extract the poison that turned humans into living corpses. It could be said to be an endless disaster. It could be said that the bad reputation of the werewolves was not only due to their bloodthirsty nature, but more than half of it was due to this kind of knockoff that looked similar. Recalling the information that Yin had mentioned and Lei Feijo's actions, whether it was the stigmata that claimed to be a werewolf, or the first discovery of old Shaw's death scene, or the huge black plastic bag that was specially brought back from the kitchen, if he was a traitor, then everything made sense. Whether it was killing June on the first night, or taking the initiative to take the initiative when old Shaw did not react, and then poisoning the food in the kitchen, all of these could be perfectly linked together. Huaishur even suspected that if he had not been hit by a stick and instead returned in a weak state and was discovered by Lei Feijo, he would not have been alive now. Other than Lily's accidental help, he probably had to thank the green spirit who threw the magical insoles and boots into the soup. If it was not for the disgusting taste, he might have frowned and drank a few mouthfuls like the others. Thinking of this, he suddenly froze. Then, he heard vague screams and roars from a distance outside the room. The chaos had already begun. It was now 1620. This group of dark creatures that had been besieged and wiped out by the Holy Spirit lineage for so many years could not guarantee a good diet. Long-term consumption of inferior food would inevitably lead to stomach ulcers and digestive tract bleeding. Once they drank the soup, they would most likely be poisoned. Then, the scale of the poison now, Huaishur's scalp began to tingle. Chapter 138. Outside Huaishur's door, chaotic screams and roars could already be heard. Someone ran out of his room as if he was running for his life. But immediately after, he was pressed to the ground by his companions who had already fallen into madness. Then, they ate him heartily. "Help! Help! You bunch of lunatics!" That terrified voice screamed, wanting to ask for help, but it attracted more and more lunatics until finally, it was drowned out by the greedy chewing sound. There was no more sound, but soon, more voices were heard. Those were murmurs, murmurs, and murmurs that no longer had any reason. Those murmurs that were like sleep-talking echoed in the intermittent roars, entangling people's ears. The disjointed and meaningless words annoyed Huaishur, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of killing intent in his heart. He wanted to chop the creators of these murmurs into pieces. Everyone who murmurs must die. He panted violently, feeling dazed. It wasn't until a glass of cold water was splashed on his face that he woke up under Ai Qing's cold warning. He was sweating profusely. "What's going on?" He looked at Lily blankly. Lily was speechless. She stretched out her hand and pointed outside the broken porthole of Huaishur's room, between the dark sea and the sky. The sky was like an iron rock, pitch black, but one couldn't tell whether it was far or near. It seemed to be untouchable, but it pressed heavily on everyone's heart. It was hard to breathe. The strange sea was still calm, without even the slightest ripple. But on the mirror-like flat surface of the sea, a waning moon that didn't exist in the sky was reflected. The waning moon was scarlet, and countless rays of light were emitted from the haze, like slender blood threads extending in all directions. The scarlet waning moon didn't ascend to the sky, but sank to the bottom of the sea. In the endless abyss, it coldly stared at a group of earthly ants. Then it sprinkled madness. Just looking at the red moon that looked like a broken eye, Huaishur felt his vision turn black, and he coughed dryly in his throat, thirsting for blood. Curse! Huaisha whispered softly. With the descent of Evernight, the god's curse on these abandoned people finally reached the surface of this empty sea. Under the illumination of the scarlet waning moon, all of their minds and rationality would be pulled out bit by bit. Then, their instincts and desires would be revealed without any concealment. Thus, the dark sea had turned into a curtain, and this cruise ship was a carefully arranged stage. The abandoned people would surrender to their original sin bit by bit, performing a final farce for the gods. But this time, no, it's obviously at this time. AI, Qing said coldly. If it was really Lei Feizhou who did it, then he must have colluded with the gods who intercepted us. Perhaps this is his secret mission. If it were any other time, the people on the ship would inevitably be affected, but at least they could restrain themselves. However, who could guarantee that they wouldn't be affected by the wolf disaster at this moment? As long as there was a trace of killing intent, it would be magnified thousands of times. In other words, it seemed that as long as one guarded their mind and was a good person, they would be safe. This might be the last mercy of the gods. Unfortunately, which of the people who boarded this ship could restrain their innate sins and choose to be a good person? Once they were used to solving problems in bloody ways, they would inevitably be devoured by their own violence and madness when encountering such a situation. Then, they would burn themselves in the flames, including Van Helsing. Above the red moon in the sea, Huaisha retracted his gaze with difficulty, feeling dizziness and pain in his trance. It was as if his blood was flowing in reverse. He staggered back a step and sat on the ground, panting violently, cold sweat oozing from his forehead. He had clearly just sucked in a mouthful of blood, but now he felt an indescribable hunger and thirst. There was a burning sensation in his pocket. He took out the hot coin and saw the red-hot cross mark on it, as well as the angry face of the archangel on the back. Holding the thunder fire and thorns in his hand, the whip from the Holy Spirit lineage had now descended on him. F*CK. He involuntarily screamed and shrank his body, feeling the sharp pain seeping from his bones. It was the Archbishop's order and urging him to complete his mission. Now, immediately. The church's surveillance had never been far away, and Huaisha's long period of slacking had finally brought about a bad outcome. The blood punishment engraved in his bones began. Along with it came an irresistible thirst and bloodthirst. The precepts that had long been engraved in his soul were like red-hot silver, tearing his soul apart and rewriting the irresistible order on his body. Find Paracelsus and burn that damned deformed child and his blasphemous creation to the supreme gods into oblivion. Our Father in heaven, may people honor your name as holy. May your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In a trance, he heard a soft whisper, like a prayer, echoing in his ears. Drops of cold water fell on his head, extinguishing the flames that seemed to want to burn him. Drops of water soaked his cheeks like soaking dry land. He opened his eyes with difficulty and saw Lily, half kneeling on the ground and praying softly, with a cup of water in her hand. The remaining water droplets in the cup dripped onto his face bit by bit, bringing with them wisps of holy light. It was as if he was being baptized again. Through this ritual of bathing, the original sin was washed away. The holy water made from the prayers of believers diluted the pain, diluting it to a tolerable range, giving him a chance to breathe. Lily stretched out her hand, opened his mouth, and rudely flipped his teeth. She glimpsed the silver alloy that had been poured into the pulp of his teeth and could not help but frown. So cruel. Who engraved such harsh precepts on you? Let's just say it's from my old father. Huaisha gasped, got up from the ground, took the cup, and drank the last bit of water in one gulp. Finally, he felt a little alive. Just a little. AI Qing, what's wrong with my card now? There's a new status called Punishment of Breach of Oath. AI Qing's voice was hoarse, perhaps because the dizziness had not ended. Even her voice was a little fuzzy. It has increased your stamina and toughness, but before you put the silver coin into Paracelsus' blood, There will be a test every 6 hours, causing pain and reducing HP. 36 hours later, the status will end. I'm free. Huaisher asked. No, you'll be killed. AI Qing bit her lip, held the armrest tightly, and did not tell him the second half of the sentence. Along with me. On the back of her pale hand, purplish-blue veins bulged. The intense pain still lingered in her body, destroying what little willpower she had left. As Huaisher's condition eased, she finally had the strength to breathe. She wiped the cold sweat on her face and looked at KP. Is this also your trick? The so-called life and death together, isn't this the same thing? KP's palm supported his chin, looking at her embarrassed appearance. Why didn't you tell the kid the seriousness of the matter? You should have let him be a little vigilant, right? If he knew the consequences, he wouldn't be so passive and slack like now. Yes. AI Qing nodded slightly, looking down at the thin piece of paper representing Huaisher, and couldn't help but chuckle. That guy, as long as there is pressure, no matter what he does, he will be fast. If you use a little bit of this information to guide him, no matter what kind of task it is, he can complete it beautifully, right? But you don't understand one thing. I'm not your hostage, and he won't be your puppet. AI Qing raised her eyes, staring at the smiling man in front of her, and told him word by word, KP, this game between us is not over yet. Before I smash your chessboard and dice in your face. No matter what you want, I won't let you get what you want. KP's expression froze, and then he raised his eyebrows, as if he was looking forward to it. I'll wait and see. In other words, we have to act now, right? Huaisher finally came back to his senses and took out his equipment from the suitcase, putting it on one by one. In such a turbulent time, I'm afraid that other people with ulterior motives will take the opportunity to take action. No matter what, this is a good time to complete the mission and plot. I can only say that Lei Feizhou did a good job as a supervisor. AI Qing coldly said, if you want to stay out of this, the gains will not make up for the losses. We have already been involved, and it will be too late when the other side comes to break down the door. Okay. Huaisher nodded and finally put the axe on the buckle behind his waist and twisted his stiff neck. Let me see what that traitor Lei Feizhou wants to do. Lily looked at him, getting ready to go, and shook her head unhappily. Are you still going to go out? After all, the old fathers can't wait anymore. Huaisher looked down at the brand mark on the back of his hand and helplessly shook his head. After I leave, you seal the door and don't let anyone break in. I thought you would ask for my help. Lily looked down at the entry in the book and nodded. Are you going to keep this favor and use it later? What kind of favor is there? Huaisher couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Even without me, you'll be fine, right? Compared to her easy and comfortable double body, he, who spent half a day and didn't even save a single person, was really inferior. How could he have the face to ask for a favor? If you don't ask for anything in return, why would you spend so much effort to save someone who has nothing to do with you? She frowned, puzzled. Are you saying that you are the kind of person in the book who will be happy to help others? Just take it that way. Huaisher waved his hand indifferently. Although I'm not sure if it's to be a hero or vanity, there's one thing I'm sure of. He took one last look at the girl in front of him and softly laughed. When I found out that you were still alive, I was really happy. Admiring her dumbfounded expression, Huaisher pushed the door open and closed it behind her, sealing off the safe and narrow space. Then, he used the short knife to nail the ghost that pounced on him to the opposite wall. Blood spurted out. The living corpse struggled with all its might, but soon its nerves were disintegrated by the poison in the sword oil, and it no longer moved. Noisy screams and roars sounded not far away, and the pungent smell of blood filled the air. It was simply refreshing. He felt the surging fierceness and killing intent in his heart. Come, facing the black shadows that were rushing towards him, Huaisher took a deep breath, and the corner of his mouth raised in a ferocious arc. Let me see if your development is normal. He took a step forward, stepped into the disaster caused by the wolf disaster. Chapter 139. The chaos spread faster than expected. In this segment, where everyone was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow, Even a little spark could lead to a tragedy of a big explosion, let alone a dozen ultimate rabies patients running around and spreading the virus. Using those unlucky people as a breeding ground, the wolfsbane had entered the spreading period from the initial incubation period. It could be said that the roots were strong and the branches were strong. After completely transforming the host into a lunatic with a brain full of eating, it began to spread in the victims. Secondary infection. Even if the following replanting of the wolfsbane had lost its infectious power, its ferocity and nature still did not change. The number of rampagers skyrocketed 10 times in an instant. Everyone was in danger. Even those who were not infected fell into madness, attacking anything that dared to approach them at all costs. At this moment, the murmurs and crazy roars of the rampagers were everywhere. The whole ship was full of chaos, sailing in the abyss as if it was falling, and its speed was getting faster and faster in the narrow corridor. Blood and wreckage were scattered everywhere. The infected, wandering around, hoarsely murmured words that no one could understand. They were driven by the hunger that filled their souls, looking for anything to eat. In an inconspicuous corner, a figure suddenly hung upside down from the ventilation duct. The axe in his hands swept across and instantly cut off the head of an infected person. Huaisher landed and stepped on the head that still wanted to open its mouth to bite him. He turned the axe handle upside down and smashed the head into a pile of mush. The corpse that lost its head was still staggering stealthily, and it suddenly did not know that it had died. Huaisher looked around and saw that there was no one else around and breathed a sigh of relief. This was not the brainless zombies in the movies. Although they were also brainless, this thing was simply a super zombie. Before being infected, these guys were all out-and-out dark creatures. They were either born with inhuman blood or fallen ascendants. Each one was harder to deal with than the other. Now that they had become a lunatic who was not afraid of death, their minds were even emptier. They did not know what fear was at all and dared to rush up when there was food. If he was surrounded by these guys, Huaisher didn't dare to say that he could escape. He had run all the way here partly because of his recklessness and partly because of his cowardice. It was all because he ran fast and had good skills. After getting rid of the guy blocking his way, he stopped fighting and rushed straight ahead, seizing the opportunity to hide. Even so, the smell of blood on his body was still detected several times by those who had an excessively sensitive sense of smell. Along the way, he didn't know how many tragedies he had witnessed. Even those who hid in their cabins and didn't dare to come out had been bitten to death by these guys. There was simply no safe place. Huaisher, on the other hand, was not worried about Gila. She was a scholar, after all. Even if she could not fight, she could still protect herself with the purification aura of her believers and the various means of the scholar herself. He was more worried about himself. He was about to lose control. Huaisher raised his head and drank the entire tube of blood. He wiped his mouth and suppressed the feeling of nausea. At the same time, he also endured the comfortable feeling of drinking sweet dew. The two completely different feelings were about to drive him crazy. Too much blood, too much death. No matter which one it was enough to arouse the desire of a vampire. Abraham Van Helsing's predatory instincts and his frenzied thirst were growing more and more uncontrollable. Even if this killing force was so strong, Huaisher did not dare to let himself be immersed in it. God knows if he would become Huaisher or Van Helsing if he became addicted. The creed and ice cold, that was engraved in his bones, constantly affected him. The Book of Destiny could pull him back once, but when he was completely changed by Van Helsing's origin substance, who would he become? Pinching his nose, Huaisher held the axe in his hand and suddenly kicked the door open. As expected, the room behind the door was empty. This was Lei Feizhou's residence. That guy had specially chosen the place furthest away from his teammates and placed the room closest to the warehouse, which was also the source of the outbreak of the chaos. He had probably already escaped and would not give Huaisher any opportunity to take advantage of him. What was left in the room was only a torn Bible and countless pages that covered the walls, floor, and even the ceiling. Those pages filled every inch of space and overlapped with each other. However, there was a blood-red color that crisscrossed between the overlapping pages. The red marks that looked like printing errors became complicated and mysterious patterns after overlapping. In the end, countless intricate red marks overlapped and intertwined to form a solemn emblem. The emblem that represented the Holy Spirit lineage. Mobile sanctuary? Huaisha looked at the scene in Lei Feizhou's room, dumbfounded. He felt like the back of his head had been split by an axe and was hallucinating. What's going on? What the hell is this? Why does Lei Feizhou, a Leakin, have a mobile sanctuary that is equivalent to a miniature church with him? Isn't this very simple? AI Qing said calmly. The Lycans themselves have some unclear connections with the gods. It's a bit of a stretch to count them as a group of dark creatures that failed in the struggle. No, it should be said that the Lycans were created by the gods from the beginning. It's normal to have connections with the Holy Spirit lineage. Otherwise, it would be impossible to grasp the timing of the blood moon's appearance so accurately. Now, we just have direct concrete evidence, so there's no need to make a fuss, right? No, since he's a member of the Holy Spirit lineage, isn't that an ally? Huaisha was furious. Why are you stabbing me in the back? Why shouldn't I stab you in the back? Just because you're an ally? AI Qing asked coldly. Besides, are you really his ally? Huaisha was stunned. He finally found his blind spot. What was the Holy Spirit lineage thinking? Since they had already sent him on board, why did they send Lei Feizhou on board as well? Since Lei Feizhou was related to the gods, he should naturally be on the same side. They each had their own missions, but they should also be able to cooperate to a certain extent. Now, it seemed that this chaos was most likely related to Lei Feizhou's mission to stir up chaos and weaken the effective power of the White Crown King to the greatest extent. Then, why didn't the Holy Spirit lineage tell them about each other's existence? It caused them to hide from each other, and then caused the two traitors who should be on the same side to stab each other in the back. Well, it was only Huaisha who was stabbed in the back by Lei Feizhou. No, it did it on purpose. AI Qing concluded decisively. The Holy Spirit lineage deliberately didn't tell you and him the specific situation and sent you on this ship. What for? Huaisha asked. There are two reasons. First, the threat of persecution is too high. Even if Lei Feizhou is on board, the Holy Spirit lineage has to send their own executioners to purposely remove him. But because this mission involves a secret that must not be known by others, the Holy Spirit lineage deliberately chose to do this. Even if there's a risk of killing each other, this secret must not flow into the ears of a second person. What about the second reason? The second reason is even simpler. It's simply the simplest workplace routine. AI Qing said coldly. They hope that Van Helsing, after completing the mission, will die on this ship. Huaisha was stunned. If I'm not wrong, this is Van Helsing's last mission in his life, Huaisha. AI Qing said calmly. Tools are consumables. Once the mission is completed, there is no need for them to continue existing. Just replace them. Van Helsing knows too much and has done too much. Perhaps his results are too good, so good that the controllers above are worried about the consequences of him losing control. But in order to achieve the goal, they have to continue using him. Then, the best result is to completely destroy him after using him. Persecution must be killed. He must not be given a chance to fish in troubled waters. But that secret was too terrifying. Van Helsing must be killed. He must not be allowed to set foot on American soil alive. This was the purpose of the Holy Spirit lineage, to end everything on this ship. Let everything sink into the abyss of the ocean. For God, for justice, for everything. However, they did not expect that Van Helsing would not be able to complete his mission even after delaying for so long for Lei Feizhou to launch the plan. Huaisha kept touching. The big model touched wildly and lost patience when he touched the Holy Spirit lineage. There was still no sign of persecution. They did not even expect that there would be a believer on the ship. A believer who could temporarily suppress Van Helsing's commandments. In the end, they're a group of big shots who sit in the office all day drinking tea. They did not even think about it before using their brains. AI Qing sneered. The more meticulous the plan, the more tragic the problem will be after encountering a problem. Patting your head and singing a few hymns, you think you have everything planned for God. But once you are shaken, you will reveal your flawed nature. You never thought that no matter how complicated the plan is, everything will be useless from the moment the ship leaves the coast. That's probably what they call being smart. Then, that bastard Lei Feijo is our opponent? Yes. AI Ching nodded. Not the main one, but the most troublesome one. Damn, you are forcing me to be a traitor. Huaisher groaned unhappily and looked down at the coins spinning at his fingertips. Traitor? It was impossible for him to be a traitor. He would never be a traitor in this lifetime. Even if Van Helsing knew that the Holy Spirit lineage wanted him dead, he would still complete his mission. On one hand, it was because of his sense of mission and faith that he would not hesitate to sacrifice himself. On the other hand, it was because of the commandments that had been deeply embedded in him since the day he became a vampire. Now, the indelible source substance and the commandments engraved in his body still remained in Huaisher's body, forcing him to carry out his own main storyline. Now, there was only one more branch, and there was nothing to be happy about. Boom! Just as he was pondering, there was a sudden, earth-shaking explosion. Even the steel ship under Huaisher's feet suddenly shook, as if something had exploded. But what followed were hysterical screams and roars. It came from the direction of the restaurant. It was Barbara's voice. Chapter 140. Loud noises kept coming from the ship, as if a terrifying battle was taking place. Even though she was far away from her homeland and had aged to this point, Papaya's power was still enough to make the steel ship tremble. It was as if she wanted to tear the entire ship apart. The woman had completely fallen into a frenzy. What's going on? Huaisher turned around in confusion, but he suddenly felt that something was wrong. He quickly walked to the window, violently smashed it, and reached out his hand. There was a gust of wind blowing, but it was completely different from what he experienced a few hours ago. In this quiet abyss of the sea, there was nothing as luxurious as the wind. These were the waves caused by the cruise ship speed, but now, Huaisher felt that something was wrong with the turbulent airflow. The ship seemed to be moving faster. On a ship that is trying to travel to the underworld, every soul is a heavy burden. A voice sounded. It was Yin, who was standing at the door. He tilted his head and looked at Huaisher, who was still in shock. He smiled mockingly. Do you understand now? Although the gods were cruel, the White Crown King did not pity them. Rather, it could be said that the god's curse was exactly what he wanted. What he wanted was not the weak, but the strong who could survive this trial. This was the command he engraved on the ship. If you just run and endure, the passengers will never reach the new land. The fuel it needs is souls and death. The more people die, the faster it will go. Huaisher turned around indifferently and raised the axe in his hand. Why are you here? To help you, of course. Yin shrugged and leaned against the doorframe. I remember we were allies. Your secret is to kill someone, right? As he spoke, he took out a palm-sized notebook from his pocket. The leather cover was covered with scratches and looked like it had been there for a long time. The name of the ship was branded on it, Mayflower. In addition to that useless manuscript, in fact, I also found this on the captain's remains. It's a gift from the White Crown King to the astute one. Yin smiled proudly. It's a passenger list that records the names of all the passengers and their real identities. With this, it's easy to find anyone. What do you think, Huaisher? No, I should say, the vampire of the church, Abraham Van Helsing. He pointed out Huaisher's real name and proved that he was telling the truth. I already know where the person you're looking for is. He put away the passenger list. Come with me. In the silence, except for the screams and murmurs in the distance, Huaisher suddenly heard AI Ching's sigh. It's been so many years, but you always like to think that you're smart, cousin. At that moment, the girl's killing intent. Huaisher, kill him. Without hesitation, Huaisher pulled the trigger of her crossbow. Boom! As the wall shattered, the young man's figure emerged from the broken crack. He staggered backward and stepped into the corridor. The rampagers who were wandering in the corridor suddenly turned their heads and looked at the dark-skinned young man. Their expressions suddenly became ferocious and hungry. They suddenly pounced on him and cut a groove on his face. "Beggar, get lost!" In his rage, the pharaoh raised his scarlet eyes and waved his hand. Under his wide robe, countless golden rays of light flew out. The sacred beetles that were residing in his body rose up and, like bullets, instantly tore the intruder to shreds. Immediately after, a bandage appeared from the gap on his face, and the handsome face was once again mended. Mummy. No, it should be called the embryonic form of the path to godly ascension. This was a sacred mark unique to the pharaohs of Egypt. Every priest who was qualified to become a pharaoh would receive this sacred mark and obtain an immortal body. Whether it was knives, axes, frost, or fire, it was difficult to kill them. After passing through the path of Olysses, they received the recognition of the gods and were bestowed with a sacred soul. They became the lord of the upper and lower worlds who combined the gods and humans and wore the red and white crowns. Now, although this soul bestowed by the gods had been taken back, the embryonic form of the sacred soul had not left. He still retained his once noble bloodline and power, and he would not allow any inferior beings to violate him. But this seemed to be unable to stop the crazy old woman. Barbara gurgled. She was roaring, screaming, roaring crazily, cursing, spitting out dirty words that no one could understand, and cursing with deep blasphemy. She stared at the Sphinx in front of the pharaoh, and there was a purple bloodstain at the corner of its mouth. It was so conspicuous. "It's you. It's you, you bastard," she screamed furiously. "You dare to kill my poor child, my only child left. I curse you. I curse you. You damn beast. I swear that you will definitely sink into the depths of this sinful sea with your master. I swear." She screamed hysterically, reached out, pulled out pieces of organs from the rotten chicken's body, and threw them at the Sphinx. They were just rotten organs, but the Sphinx did not dare to take them head on. It kept dodging, filled with Papaya's curses and the grudge of Poppy before his death. Poppy's innards had turned into a real bullet of vengeance. Countless viscous venom and black shadows spewed out of it, flying in the air, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as they slammed into the Sphinx, leaving whiplash marks on the body of this mixed-blood divine beast. Each whiplash mark tore through the flesh, leaving deep traces of decay. The Sphinx had turned into its original form, a Sphinx with a human face. However, its size was not as terrifying as its father's. It was only a few meters tall. There were still traces of the beast on its face, and there was no light of wisdom in its eyes. Instead, it was filled with the ferocity and anger of a beast. It was a degenerate or a bastard. Just like its master, the pharaoh's guard had lost the power to search the soul. All that was left was the strength and life of a beast. However, it was still enough to fight Barbara head-on. It was not at a disadvantage. "Cush!" The pharaoh roared and glared at the old man who was sitting in a wheelchair in the dining room. "Do you want to break the covenant? Just because my guard ate one of your damn chickens? If this is your wish, then I can bestow upon you the destruction that you have always dreamed of." The old man was silent. He just stared at the bowl of soup in front of him that had already turned cold. It was as if he had Alzheimer's disease. However, those rampagers who had turned into wolves did not even dare to get close to him. Even if they only smelled his scent, they would retreat in panic. It was as if they were running away from their natural enemy. Even if he looked like an old man who was about to die. He held the spoon with his trembling hand and poured the venom into his throat with trembling hands. Drop by drop, slowly, until the bowl of thick soup full of wolf venom was drunk into his stomach. He put down his gold-rimmed spoon, picked up a napkin, and slowly wiped the corners of his mouth. "Enough, Yaga." Cush raised his head tremblingly and stared at his crazy sister with his turbid eyes. "Dinner time is over. How long are you going to behave atrociously?" Yaga suddenly turned around and stared at him angrily. "Scream. I said enough." Cush raised his voice as if he was angrily rebuking. However, as he advanced, he coughed violently and spat out the wolf venom in the soup on the ground. "Let's stop here." He looked at his sister and decisively issued a notice. In the language of his hometown, he said word by word, "Forget about that damn chicken. Forget about the broken house that had nothing but bones. You've been in that damn hell for long enough, my dear sister." Yaga's face was ferocious, as if his eyes were about to pop out. He glared at his brother. "Is that why you brought me to another hell?" Kush suppressed his cough and said in a hoarse voice, I just want to set you free." "Huh, freedom." Yaga laughed wildly. "Look at this place. A broken ship that is doomed to sink. An inescapable curse. My dear brother, is this the freedom you're giving me? Curses can be broken, Yaga. Believe me," Kush said hoarsely. "I promise, we'll have a new beginning in America. Now, there's just a little problem, a little." But before he could finish, he began to cough again. It was a heart-wrenching sound. The hollow sound was as if his lungs no longer existed. It was painful and sharp. He clutched his throat, opened his mouth, and gasped violently, until Yaga came up to him and pulled his hand away. She took out a small silver flask and poured the magic potion brewed by the witch into his lungs. Carefully, one drop at a time. In an instant, the coughing stopped. Kush collapsed on the chair and gasped violently. He could not speak. Only Yaga lowered his head and looked at him. After a long time, he shook his head in disappointment. "Brother, you really broke my heart." She did not say anything else. With a choked sob, she carried Bobby's body and turned to leave. In the silence, the Pharaoh's applause sounded. "What a good show." The boy sneered and tilted his head to look at him. "Kush, how are you going to compensate her for her offense?" Kush did not speak. He only gasped for breath. After a long time, he picked up a napkin and wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth. He leaned on his wheelchair tiredly. "Amon Messiah, do you know?" Kush suddenly said. "Respect is mutual." "Respect?" The Pharaoh was amused. "You actually said the word respect to me?" "Yeah, isn't this a topic between a homeless stray dog and another homeless stray dog?" Chapter 141. Yes, isn't this a topic between a homeless stray dog and another homeless stray dog? Koth finally raised his eyes and stared at the boy in front of him with murky eyes. "Am I not in awe of your former title? Even if you only held it for less than 2 days, you still received the courtesy of a pharaoh from me. Or should I say that a priest who has lost his favor asked for more charity from me?" The hoarse voice was filled with the fury of the immortals, the shapeshifters, and the Demon King. "If you want my respect, perhaps you shouldn't have refused the sacrifice of a snake. Before you were chased out of that chair, you should have died with honor, instead of dragging out an ignoble existence like a stray dog." Amon Messiah's expression twisted. It was as if there were countless insects crawling underneath. He had such a handsome face, but at the moment, he was as ferocious as a devil. He gritted his teeth and squeezed out a voice from between his teeth. "Oh, Kush, you've really broken my heart." So the Sphinx raised his eyes and stared at the old man in front of him ferociously. Likewise, the old man in the wheelchair looked back indifferently. "If you want to walk off this ship with dignity, don't offend my family anymore, Amon Messiah. This is the last warning an incompetent elder brother can give you." In the silence, neither of them spoke. There was only the sound of whining in the distance. After a long time, Amon Messiah's expression finally calmed down. "Very well." He took a step back and said in a cold voice, "Sphinx, let's go." He turned and left. The orange cat looked at Koth coldly and disappeared into the corridor with him. The broken restaurant regained its silence. Amidst the whining and screaming in the distance, the lonely old man stared at the empty soup bowl on the table and the spoon that had once been the only thing left of countless wealth. Respect. Imagine that you were once a pharaoh, the only agent of God in the world, the manifestation of the soul, the unique God of the human world, and all the glory in the world belonged to you. At least the glory of Egypt belonged to you. Your glory and greatness are everywhere in the vast land of Africa. In front of you, people bow their heads, lick your toes in awe, and experience the greatness of your divine might and grace. Until one day a slut, a whore, suddenly received the favor of those capricious gods, and this favor was even more than what you received. Then you lose your power, your honor, your strength, and everything else. He had even almost lost his precious life in the so-called snake worship, falling into the dust. He was expelled from the country and territory that had once proclaimed how great he was. He was forced to wander in the mud and dust, and had no choice but to live in the same room with those lowly people who reeked of stench. In order to regain power, you have no choice but to sit in the same boat as those sneaky people who were once worthless in front of him. These were all sacrifices. In order to achieve a goal, in order to become great again, a little sacrifice needed to be made. If he could get what he wanted, everything he had lost now would be insignificant. But now, those lowly commoners are actually asking you to work together with them, even asking for respect from you. Respect? 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 Amon Messiah strolled in the corridor covered in blood and muttered to himself. It was hard to tell whether his expression was ferocious or mocking. An old ghost who is about to die of old age dares to mention this word to me? How dare you? The wolf who had lost control roared and pounced forward. Then, it was torn apart by the Sphinx's sharp claws. In the end, it was swallowed into his stomach. He chewed it into pieces, tasted it, and spat it on the ground in disgust. Meow. The orange cat, who had long lost its intelligence, turned around and made a sorrowful sound to the pharaoh. Amon Messiah was stunned for a moment, and his expression became more and more distorted. His guard, his mount, his symbiote had been reduced to the extent of having to swallow such a damn thing. Just like him, they were all losers who had long been abandoned by this world. Don't eat these anymore, Sphinx. He bent down and gently picked it up from the ground, stroking its fur. I promise, my dear, we will rise again. Meow. The Sphinx meowed, seemingly understanding. Amon Messiah pursed his lips, continued forward, and returned to his cabin. As a noble pharaoh, even the White Crown King would give him preferential treatment. For example, this luxurious guest room was different from the narrow warehouses of other pariahs. It had a wide bed and a wine cabinet with soft light. Back in the room, the Sphinx ran to its food bowl and began to chew the fresh meat in it happily. Respect. Amon Messiah still could not forget the humiliation he had suffered. He drank the wine soaked in wormwood, put the cup back to its original place, and sat on the chair. One day, he murmured hoarsely, "You and your bitch will understand what respect is. I don't think you will live to see that day." A hoarse voice sounded. Amon Messiah suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction of the voice. He saw the figure who pushed the door open and entered. As if he was seriously ill, he staggered forward, and foul-smelling corpse water dripped from his cloak. He reached out and picked up a bottle of wine from the wine cabinet. After breaking the bottle, he poured it into his mouth under the hood. The wine dripped from the corner of his mouth, or from the hole in his abdomen. It mixed with the rancid liquid and dripped onto the soft carpet, dyeing a large gray stain. How dare you? Amon Messiah's eyes widened. Without his instructions, the Sphinx jumped up and tore the madman who dared to trespass the pharaoh's bedroom into pieces. The broken limbs fell to the ground, and maggots surged in the rotting flesh. But then, the Sphinx's expression changed. As if in extreme pain, it convulsed in pain and suddenly opened its mouth to vomit, but nothing came out. It could only scream in pain. The sound of chewing could be heard coming from the stomach. Crunch, 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 crunch. The crazy beast endured the intense pain and rolled violently, turning the entire luxurious room into a mess. But not long after, it stopped moving. Only the skin on its abdomen slowly bulged. It was torn apart from the inside out. A ferocious face that had been corroded to the bone was revealed. This head can't be used anymore. The ferocious face grinned at the pharaoh. In front of his chest, a large mouth slowly opened and greedily gnawed at the Sphinx's limbs. Inch by inch, the Sphinx's blood, which contained a thin amount of divinity, corroded his body with a sizzling sound. It ate happily and enjoyed its dinner. It let out a hoarse moan in the intense pain and then swallowed happily. And the three different heads stared blankly at the stiff pharaoh. What the hell is this? At that moment, Amon Messiah let out a groan of despair. Yin Yin, 20 years old, intern inspector of the Astronomy Association. He liked singing, dancing, and her probably. Maybe he didn't like any of them. Who knew? Anyway, the only thing Huaisher knew was that when he fought, he really looked like a noob. What was it again? In short, noob was right. In esports, noobs are the original sin. Huaisher flew up and kicked the knife in his hand away. Then he swung his axe and chopped down on his head. In an instant, bone and flesh separated, and one of Yin Yan's arms flew into the air. 2 seconds ago, when AI Qing gave the order, the traitor Huaisher, who was already prepared, launched a backstab. Don't ask why. If you ask, you're traitor. He raised his hand and fired 3 arrows in succession. At such a close distance, within 10 steps, the silver arrows would arrive in an instant. But Yin Yan was actually able to dodge. He really was a traitor. Huaisher was furious. You're exposed now, aren't you? If you didn't have a guilty conscience, why would you be so wary of me? Even if he dodged, there was no chance. Even if he dodged the 2 arrows at the back, he couldn't dodge the first one. It directly pierced through his chest, leaving a scorched mark. Yin Yan rolled on the ground and screamed in pain. Then, he turned invisible and disappeared without a trace. Then, Huaisher saw a charred scar floating in the air, charging straight at him. Then, the tragic scene just now happened. It was a complete beating. Even without relying on the skills and experience in Van Helsing's memory, Huaisher was beaten back to his original form, and he could still easily make 81 poses with this thing. Speaking of which, why did you want to cut him? Huaisher asked belatedly. Because he has a guilty conscience. AI Qing sneered. Ignoring the flaws, in other words, this brother of mine, if he had any good things since he was young, he would definitely hide them well. How would he share them? What if I cut the wrong person? Then I'll cut the wrong person. AI Qing said coldly. Anyway, I'm going to cut him down anyway. It's just a little earlier. We won't lose out if we can get the crew list. Why are all of you tactical players so dirty? Huaisher sighed in his heart and became even more ruthless. After swinging his axe, his left hand pulled out a dagger from his waist and rushed forward with a horizontal sweep. Yin Yan rolled on the ground and crawled into the corridor. CK, how long are you going to watch? Following Yin Yan's scream, hoarse whispers and roars suddenly sounded in the quiet corridor and the quiet rooms on both sides. Dozens of rampagers in wolf form rushed out from behind the fragile door panels and rushed toward Huaisher. You want to run after offending the demon hunters? Huaisher raised his hand and fired 3 more crossbow bolts. It was unknown whether they hit their targets, but a wolf form was already rushing toward him. Get lost. The axe fell and chopped the dog's head into pieces. Huaisher kicked the ghost that was still alive and kicking to the side. Then, another rampager pounced on him. In the blink of an eye, the corridor was filled with people. They were all opponents. Die. Huaisher held a dagger in his left hand and an axe in his right. With a roar, he turned around and ran. Chapter 142. Go to hell. Huaisher held the blade in his left hand and the axe in his right hand. He roared and then turned around and ran. What else could he do? What was he doing? More than a dozen dark creatures had transformed into uncontrollable wolves, which meant more than a dozen fearless Tier 2 and Tier 3 sublimators. Not to mention their exquisite techniques. Even a single claw from each of them would not be enough. I can't chat with you guys, so I'm running away. They probably didn't expect Huaisher to be so spineless as to turn around and run. The group of wolves who were waiting for him were stunned. By the time they reacted, Huaisher had already run 39 meters away. They couldn't take out the 40-meter blade, so they could only desperately chase after him. When they reached the dead end of the corridor, Huaisher was nowhere to be seen. They couldn't find any trace of him in the ventilation ducts. Only the cold sea breeze blew in from the smashed porthole. When Huaisher climbed up to the deck from the stern, he was already panting. Running on water required too much explosive power. Even he didn't dare to try it often. Now the ship's speed was extraordinarily fast. Although there was no reference, Huaisher was almost left behind by the cruise ship. Fortunately, she managed to grab hold of the ladder. Otherwise, she would have sunk into the sea alone. Recalling the situation just now, he finally concluded that Lei Feijo and Yin Yan had colluded. That's right. Maybe his performance in the kitchen was to gain her trust. But it's meaningless to dwell on this. After all, the result can't be changed. Now they're all enemies. And AI Qing paused and sighed. Yin Yan came to find you, which means they have already been to your room. Huaishir was stunned for a long time before he finally reacted. You mean Lily? Yes. AI Qing nodded in pity. I'm afraid it's a disaster. Huaishir cursed in a low voice, and his expression became ferocious. Clenching the axe, he slowly got up, took the last tube of blood, and poured it into his mouth. He felt the nausea and pleasure in his chest, and his eyes were bloodshot. What do you plan to do? I've had enough of these traitors. Huaishir grinned and sighed, revealing his sharp canine teeth. Forget about Paracelsus. Let's kill these bastards first. Since everyone already knew that a crow was a crow and a wild boar was a wild boar, then let's see who's the blackest. When Huaishir followed the rope back to his room, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. The fluke in the depths of his heart had completely disappeared. Amidst the mess, he saw the blood on the ground with a familiar aura. The broken limbs were thrown to the ground in pieces. Huaishir looked at the arm that had fallen beside his feet. Her slender hand was still holding onto the thick dictionary. Unfortunately, the pages of the dictionary were soaked in blood and were about to melt. Huaishir bent down and carefully picked up the dictionary. She closed it and put it away in her bosom. He raised his head and looked ahead expressionlessly. He saw the person sitting next to the corpse. This is an accident. He stared at Lei Feijo's face. I thought you would be hiding somewhere that I couldn't find. Before you came back, I was actually thinking. In the pool of blood, the bearded man raised his eyes and glanced at him. He kicked the broken corpse at his feet. I wouldn't have been tricked by a double body this time, right? This is the bad thing about scholars. It's hard to tell if she's really dead or not. He paused and slowly raised his head. The corners of his eyes were slightly raised. But looking at you, she should really be dead. Huaishir was silent. He didn't say anything. He just pulled out his dagger and axe. He moved his neck slightly, making a cracking sound. Have you eaten? He suddenly asked. I've been holding back since I boarded the ship. I just had a satisfying meal. Lei Feijo laughed. How about you? I only drank some water. I'm half full. Huaishir sighed softly. Seeing you eat so happily. I'm hungry too. Vampire's canine teeth suddenly popped out from his parted lips. At that moment, Huaishir disappeared from where he was. Forward. Bang. Lei Feijo's pupils dilated. He took a step back, surprised by Huaishir's terrifying speed. The brass knuckles in his hand cracked under the chop of the axe blade. But before he could react, another blade light burst out from Huaishir's left hand. The axe blade was just an auxiliary. The real killing move came from the assassination knife technique of the Inquisition. Without any warning, Huaishir's arm seemed to have no bones. After disappearing into her sleeves, it popped out from her collar and turned into a venomous snake. The venomous fangs of steel whizzed out. In the sharp sound of metal friction, Lei Feijo's whole mouth was split open, as if it had doubled in size out of thin air. A forked tongue flew out from the open mouth. In a single exchange, his head was almost sliced in half by Huaishir's blade. But then, he clenched Huaishir's arm that was holding the knife. His big, ferocious mouth that was split open curled up, as if he was smiling. A wolf-like roar came out from between the teeth. In an instant, the deck on both sides of the room and above the head was broken. The wolf shifters hidden in it tore the steel apart. Following the order of the wolf's howl, they attacked Huaishir, who had no way to dodge. You can't move, can you? Lei Feijo laughed hoarsely. This was the death trap he had prepared for his teammate. Who said so? Huaishir, who was close at hand, asked. A crisp sound suddenly came from the left elbow he was holding. It was dislocated. The moment his elbow was dislocated, Huaishir jumped up. After getting rid of the limitation of the bones, he went against common sense and threw himself into the air, falling behind Lei Feijo. In midair, he aimed his arm at Lei Feizhou's head and pulled the trigger with his pinky finger. Under his sleeve, 3 demon-piercing crossbow bolts whistled out. As Lei Feizhou hastily dodged, an arrow pierced through his neck in an instant. 2 more arrows completely smashed his rotten face into smithereens. The blessed pure silver couldn't do anything to the lichen with the thin god's blood inheritance, but the poison smeared on it corroded the wound, making sizzling sounds. Amidst the severe pain, Lei Feizhou roared. His 5 blade-like fingers grabbed a huaishu in the air, but grabbed nothing. Like a gymnast who came to participate in the Olympics, he completely used Lei Feizhou as a horizontal bar and began to show off his fancy moves. In the air, huaishu circled around, using his rope-like arm to swing back and forth. He looked for a fulcrum on Lei Feizhou's body, and his speed was unbelievably fast. Those wolf shifters who flew over seemed to have never seen such a fancy move. For a moment, they couldn't catch him, and the axe in his hand chopped down at Lei Feizhou's head. "Go to hell! In your dreams!" Lei Feizhou roared. He raised his right hand and grabbed at huaishu's axe blade that was chopping down. The collision of iron and bone burst out a resounding cry. Blood spurted out. Even a lichen couldn't compare the hardness of his body with an axe. With one blow, Lei Feizhou's thumb was cut off, but the remaining 4 fingers suddenly closed together and clamped the axe blade together with his palm, like an iron clamp. Then Lei Feizhou roared, "Come down!" Grabbing huaishu's arm and axe with both hands, he pulled huaishu and suddenly smashed him to the ground. The wind whistled, but in mid-air, huaishu had already let go of his hand holding the axe handle. His whole body floated to the left and suddenly kicked a wolf shifter's face. Lei Feizhou's strength and huaishu's real weight after removing the divine mark. Bang! In an instant, the sound of bones breaking was heard. A head flew backward from the neck and hung on the back of the wolf shifter. And the wolf shifter didn't even have time to react to what had happened. He was sent flying by this sudden burst of strength. Finally, his whole body was stuck in the porthole that huaishu had smashed. His 2 legs kicked hard, but he couldn't climb out at all. And huaishu had already taken advantage of this short gap to pull out a test tube from the medicine bag at his waist and smashed it on the ground with all his might. In an instant, silver mist suddenly gushed out, expanded, and shrouded everything. The last silver nitrate. Not only did the rising fog cover everyone's eyes, it even corroded Lei Feizhou's exposed skin, causing him to feel a sharp pain. Then he felt that his hand was empty. huaishu had broken free from his restraint. He disappeared into the thick mist. At that moment, he heard a sneer in his ear and a shuddering whisper, "Hallelujah." The next moment, the sound of steel whistling suddenly burst out. Just like Lei Feizhou's terrifying, contagious wolf venom, Yin Yan's terrifying degree of stealth, and Yu Jun's 2 lives, every character selected as an investigator seemed to have their own unique specialties and characteristics. For example, Van Helsing, 31 years old, was a vampire, a professional demon hunter, or to put it more seriously, he was the judge with the most merits among all the Holy Spirit vampires. He was the most outstanding consumable among the demon hunters that the church had cultivated for decades. A vampire killer who sucked blood, a dark creature who mingled among the dark creatures, and a person who was allowed to clean up the fallen creatures, an executioner who fed on his own kind. In other words, in the turbulent silver mist, huaishu grinned and smiled silently. A traitor who specializes in killing his own people. Bang! With a pull of his pinky, a demon-piercing crossbow arrow flew out and pierced through the head of a rampager in wolf form, nailing him to the wall. huaishu stepped forward and slashed down with the axe in his hand. The crisp sound of limbs being torn apart came from the silver mist. Darkness was sometimes the shelter of dark creatures. Many types of stigmata had the ability to see in the dark, just like ghosts. But only this mist, which was a mixture of a large amount of alchemy potions and pure silver, was a dark curtain that no talent could see through, including huaishu. Even the pure silver here was highly toxic to him. He couldn't even breathe in here. But he seemed to be used to it. in the countless trainings in Van Helsing's memory. So he became silent, like a ghost, patiently and cautiously looking for his prey in this turbulent silver mist. Relying on the sound of heartbeats, whispers, and the friction of clothes, he unhurriedly cut off the dark creatures one by one, just like what he had done countless times before. If Lei Feijo thought that he was fearless because he had a large number of wolves, then he would now know how wrong he was. When wolves and hunters were in the same room, the hunt had already begun. Chapter 143. To want world peace, to want humans to unite, to want a beautiful future, or to let justice prevail forever. Compared to such extravagant wishes, killing something was actually a very simple matter. That was because life was originally so fragile. Before reaching the legendary level of rank 4-star in, all living things were mortals. No matter what kind of miracle incarnation or what kind of person ascended, once their throat was slit and their heart pierced, death was only a matter of course. In other words, if the result could be obtained by destroying something, then it was far simpler than creating something worth longing for. This was what the so-called killing was all about. A shortcut, a universal solution. Even if it wasn't the best choice, it could always solve the urgent situation and allow the terrible loss of self-control to be pacified, allowing a chaotic matter to be resolved cleanly. If one wanted to slack off and pursue the cost-performance ratio, there was nothing more suitable than this method. Thus, the stake, the Inquisition, and even the judge were born. From the first day of their birth, they had been meticulously thinking about how to clean up, sweep away, and even slaughter heresies in the most efficient way. Through 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration, they had created a tool like Van Helsing. They had invoked the Genesis Codex of the Holy Bible's chapter Genesis and extracted the legend of the vampire to create this heresy that belonged to us, a monster that was allowed to temporarily exist under the light. They had imparted inconceivable killing techniques and undefiable commandments, imposed unforgivable sins and indelible piety, and finally obtained great achievements that couldn't be ignored and a dark history that couldn't exist. I know your actions. You are hardworking, persevering, and abhor evil. You have once detected those fake apostles and exposed their masks. A hoarse whisper came from the pale, white fog. Immediately after, the color of blood burst forth, dyeing the lingering white fog a wisp of mournful red. Amidst the wolf's roar, a fleeting figure moved forward, slashing down the knife and axe in his hands as he whispered softly, I know your actions. You only have the false reputation of being alive, but in reality, you are dead. Huaisher stepped forward, feeling the madness and rage burning in his chest. He raised his scarlet eyes and swept his short knife horizontally, chopping off the head in front of him. You must repent and remember the lessons you have received and heard before, and keep them. If you don't wake up, I will be like a nightmare, suddenly appearing when you least expect it. In this way, he preached to the dead. This was the final divine sermon. There was no need to deliberately seek it. It was so natural that it was as smooth as breathing, as if it did not exist. He was clearly a cold-blooded creature, but under Silver's agitation, his surging blood seemed to be boiling, igniting, and burning him. He moved through the fog of death, creating even more death. Following the howls of the wolves, more and more wolf shapeshifters gathered and charged into the fog. However, Lei Feijo staggered back and used all his strength to pull out the arrow nailed to his neck. It was unknown whether it was pain or hatred, but the broken face became even more ferocious. But even though the arrow was pulled out, the wound didn't heal as expected. He didn't even feel any pain, only cold numbness. It was completely necrotic. This was a lethality that even lichens with divine bloodlines couldn't repair. What kind of poison is this? It's chocolate. Someone looked at his faintly wolf face and whispered in his ear, I smeared chocolate on the knife. Lei Feijo turned his head in horror, but he saw the black shadow that ignored gravity and hung upside down on the ceiling, as well as the axe blade that was raised from the bottom to the top toward his face. On the dark green blade of the axe, there was a sweet fragrance that seeped into the heart. Lei Feijo subconsciously leaned back. Then, iron and bone collided, creating sparks from the friction. Cracks crisscrossed, chiseling an inverted cross symbol on Lei Feijo's face. Blood spurted out. Before he could react, the black shadow swung a short knife from midair and pierced into Lei Feijo's lungs. With a twist of the wrist, the roar that was brewing inside was torn apart. The pair of blood-stained eyes appeared in front of Lei Feijo again, burning with fire. The whistling of the wind finally rose from Huaishi's hand. He raised the heavy axe blade above his head and chopped down on Lei Feijo's face again. At the last moment, Lei Feijo only had time to crush the amulet on his neck. Bang! The axe blade created sparks from the friction between the pitch-black fingers. It had been blocked. Sharp fingernails popped out of Lei Feijo's fingers, instantly turning pitch-black like the edge of a blade. New bones, flesh, and dark hair also grew out of the mutilated palm in an instant. With a hoarse roar, Lei Feijo's body rose little by little. The bones in his head made a sound like steel being twisted. His nose extended and his eye sockets sunk. In the blink of an eye, his former disguise revealed the nature of a Leakin. Between the tangled strands of hair, there was suddenly a faint electric light bursting forth. With just a wave of his hand, he left a dazzling afterimage in the air, tearing apart the obstructing cabin planks as if they were thin paper. The narrow room fell apart in an instant. Even the silver mist was blown away by the fierce wind stirred up by the lightning, revealing a scene of bloody devastation and wreckage. The other hand, which was several times thicker, smashed toward Huaishi's face with a roar. The fist wrapped in lightning hit the handle of the axe, sending Huaishi flying. He smashed into the wall, almost throwing him out of the cabin and into the sea. Feeling the numbness in his arm, Huaishi gasped violently. He raised his head and stared at the unrecognizable Lei Feijo. This disguise is not bad. You should have taken out earlier. The wolf's face became more and more distorted. Obviously, this state was not something he could casually take out and use as he pleased. The gods' gifts were limited, and they would never allow their servants to squander them wantonly. But once taken out, it was enough to change the situation of the battle. Now, with his roar, the wolf shifters in the corridor tore apart the walls and rushed into the cabin. They had completely surrounded the place, and the mist they used to hide in had disappeared without a trace. Lei Feijo sneered. I have to say, you missed the last chance to escape. You're mistaken about one thing. Huaishi smeared the poisonous sword oil on the axe again and calmly replied, I've never thought of escaping. Lei Feijo was stunned for a moment. Then, he couldn't help but laugh mockingly. Just for an NPC? An NPC? Just an NPC? Huaishi lowered his head and looked at the blood-stained dictionary in his arms. He didn't answer. He actually had a lot to say. He wanted to tell the supervisor behind Lei Feijo, many people are like you. After becoming a sublimator, they treat everything as a luxurious game, even if we don't live in the game. They would make a mess of everything without any scruples or respect. They would do whatever they wanted and leave a mess on the ground. Then, they would smile and say to you, relax, this is just a game. I don't intend to hurt you. You're just an NPC. But for those who died because of this, this was not a game. Death was real. It was cruel, sad, and disgusting. No matter how many times they experienced it, it wouldn't change. It shouldn't be something that could be smoothed over with a light excuse and reason. But in the end, it was meaningless to say these things. Weak words alone could never convince anyone. Otherwise, why would the Inquisition exist, and why would something like Van Helsing be created? For some reason, Huaishi suddenly thought of the village in the records again. There were also the dead old people, women, and children, those stooped bodies that had lost their warmth lying in a pool of blood. Their empty eyes reflected the barren world. They died silently in an insignificant struggle 60 years ago, like weeds. No one knew, and no one remembered, except for Huaishi himself. So, he clenched his axe and replied softly, yes, just for an NPC. I now believe what Enian said. You really aren't AI Ching. The The supervisor behind Lei Feizhou sneered. At least, she won't be as stupid as you. Is that so? Maybe you haven't seen how she looks when she's angry? Huaishur stared calmly at the Leakin. Separated by many rampagers who had transformed into wolves, he said, "But no matter what, I have to thank you. Thank you for reminding me again how powerless I am when I can't even save an NPC." At that moment, the knife and axe collided in Huaishur's hands. The demon hunter raised his blood-red eyes, grinned, and showed the same ferocious canine teeth to the beasts. "Come." He took a step forward. Amid the bursting sparks, the sound of steel rang out. The knife and axe slashed. The top bowstring broke at this moment. The brief calm was broken, as if the surface of ice had cracked, and a monstrous turbid wave burst out amidst the loud roar. As the wolf shifter roared, blood spurted out from the blade of the axe and dyed the pale face red. He took a second step forward amidst the surging rampagers. Ignoring the torn wound on his back, Huaishur raised his axe and slashed again. The bones and flesh were torn apart, and the broken head and limbs flew into the air. Immediately after, the dagger stabbed forward and pierced the throat. He swung it horizontally, and blood splattered everywhere. Countless blue and purple blood vessels appeared on the neck and extended upward, covering Huaishur's face like layers of spider silk. Blood mixed with silver and various alchemy potions had already been injected into his pulse through the needle under his sleeve, bringing him endless pain and strength. It was like drinking poison to quench thirst. But his consciousness became extremely calm, like ice iron thrown into the deep sea. He brandished the saber and axe in his hands, drawing out complicated arcs and sketching out traces of blood in the blink of an eye. Huaishur raised his hand and shot the last arrow behind him. Ignoring the guy who was nailed to the wall, he opened his mouth and bit the throat of a wolf shifter, sucking the blood that represented life. Then, he tore his throat and dealt a fatal blow with the blade of the axe. The wolf poison mixed in the blood flowed in his body, but it was killed by the poison in his blood. He was moving forward. Besieged by blood and death, he roared. Chapter 144. Lei Feizhou heard Huaishur's roar, but he only sneered and remained unmoved. He raised his voice and roared, urging the wolf shapeshifters to come forward and completely drown him. But this time, Huaishur didn't give him time to give orders. It was like a bird flying in the sky. It reversed gravity in an instant. The thin figure in the pack of wolves leaped up, cracks spreading from the floor under his feet. He was already high in the air, galloping over the hole-riddled cabin wall. In an instant, whether it was the chaotic wolf shapeshifters, the broken walls, or the collapsed ceiling, they all became his temporary foothold. He didn't even cause the slightest sound. Lei Feizhou was stunned for a moment. When the vampire's terrifying agility was displayed in such a way, the wolf pack's strategy of attrition had lost its meaning, and the black figure in the blood was already close at hand. Naive, the Leakin sneered. In the burst of lightning, the axe blade and the sharp claws collided again. The numbness spread, and Huaishur's movements paused for a moment. But then he saw Lei Feizhou's arm waving, and the sharp blade in his left hand swept across his face. Even if he raised his arm to block in front of him, he still felt the pain of his bones and flesh being broken. He flew backwards, and his left arm had already been torn open with several terrible wounds. Amidst the surging blood, his pale blue bones could be seen. Before he landed, the wounds were forcibly healed under the stimulation of alchemy blood. And in his right hand, the axe blade had already left his hand and flew into the air. Without waiting for Lei Feizhou to withdraw his gaze from the whirling axe blade, a dagger slipped out of his right sleeve. He held it tightly with 5 fingers and stabbed it with a backhand. In an instant, it pierced through the bursting lightning and nailed into his face. It was understandable that when your nose bridge was too long, there would always be people who wanted to use it to make a fuss. But it was unacceptable. The Leakin roared. The moment Huaishur landed, he let go of his hand, staggered back, and caught the axe handle falling from the air. Ignoring the wolf pack behind him, he rushed forward again. This time, the hunter and the Leakin collided. The blade of the axe and the sharp claws rubbed against each other, emitting the roar of steel colliding. The Leakin roared in anger. Amidst the deafening roar, his mutated body expanded once again. He actually managed to push Huaisher back a step. Then, he gripped the axe and the blade in his hands and unleashed his power once again. Huaisher was no longer able to stand firm under the pressure of a force that was several times stronger than his own. He was suddenly pulled up and smashed into the wall again. He didn't even have time to slide down from the deck before he saw the huge Leakin crouch on the ground, its heavy body charging towards him like a cannonball. In an instant, the twisted cabin wall behind Huaisher was shattered. Huaisher only felt darkness in front of his eyes as Lei Feizhou pushed him into the next room. That enormous power did not stop and continued to rumble forward. Immediately after, another layer of the cabin wall was shattered under the impact. Huaisher opened his mouth and spat out pieces of his internal organs and clotted blood, which fell to the ground with a sizzling sound. The lightning that twined around Lei Feizhou's body almost pierced through his entire body. But Lei Feizhou didn't have it easy either. Even if he didn't have any strength, Huaisher could at least move his little finger, especially when it was aimed at his eye socket. The last blessed bolt shot out from the broken crossbow mechanism pierced deeply into his left eye, leaving only a short section of the end. Blood flowed like a stream. Lei Feizhou roared, stretched out his hand, and pulled Huaisher up with his sharp claws. He grabbed him by the neck and lifted him up. But at that moment, he didn't know why, but his hands went soft. It was as if he was having a cramp. The numbness came suddenly and disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It was so short that it seemed like it didn't happen at all, but it was also so abnormal. In the reflection of the broken porthole, he seemed to see a familiar shadow flashing behind him, like a ghost. Someone was standing behind him. Who's there? He turned his head subconsciously, but he didn't see anything. Then, he felt a sharp pain coming from his neck. At the moment when he was sluggish, Huaisher broke free from the restraint and looked at Lei Feizhou's exposed neck. Under the cover of the lightning, it was like a duck's neck under the spotlight. He grinned, revealing his sharp canine teeth. It's time to eat. Then, the Leakin roared in pain. When the vampire's sharp canine teeth pierced his neck, it was followed by a dizziness, which came from the toxin on the vampire's teeth. But then, the canine teeth seemed to have turned into red-hot iron nails, bringing bursts of burning pain. The pure silver holy words embedded in the canine teeth were frantically purifying everything, whether it was him or Huaisher himself. But what terrified him was that the lightning that he could control, as if it was part of his body, was quickly dissipating. Along with his atavistic wolf state, the blessings bestowed by the gods were being consumed at a rate dozens of times faster than expected. No, it should be said that it was being taken away. As the blood was absorbed, this power flowed into Huaisher's body and was digested into the pure essence of life. Wasn't the essence of the vampire's stigmata to take away the victim's life, power, and even everything through the blood as a medium? Even if the blood that carried the dense lightning light burned his face until it sizzled, soon after the charred surface peeled off, pale flesh and skin would be reborn. Get away from me. Lei Feizhou struggled hard, exhausted all his strength, and finally pulled Huaisher off his body. However, there was a huge wound on his neck. Even his aorta was torn, and blood was constantly gushing out. He staggered back. Before he could stand firm, he saw Huaisher, who had rolled on the ground, get up again, dragging the axe on the ground, and walk toward him step by step. Lei Feizhou let out a hoarse scream. The wolf shifters surrounded him, giving him a short respite. After half a minute, the Leakin used the last trace of lightning to dispel the silver curse on the wound and close the fatal wound on the aorta. However, the blessed divine state had already ended, much earlier than expected. However, compared to him, Huaisher's situation was more tragic. Even though he was replenished with blood, there were still many wounds on his body. The purple spider web spots on his face became more serious. The poison had seeped into his bone marrow. He tried his best to breathe. Too naive, little brat, too naive. Lei Feijo looked at the vampire who was surrounded and laughed hoarsely. Even if you kill me, can that NPC girl come back? What you're doing is meaningless. You're just digging your own grave. Maybe. Huaisher looked up expressionlessly and threw out a flying knife from the chaotic battle, leaving a gap in his smile. But someone has to pay the price for this, right? Lei Feijo's smile gradually became gloomy. He let out a long scream. Huaisher was faster than him. After tearing off the empty blood bag, the vampire mustered up his remaining strength. The knife and axe in his hand swept through the air and chopped off the head of the former wolf shifter. Stepping on the corpse that had yet to fall to the ground, he rose into the air again like a ghost and silently approached Lei Feijo. This time, Lei Feijo didn't try to resist. Instead, he took a few steps back to avoid the sharp edge. After losing the ancestral state of being blessed by the gods, he didn't dare to confront the horrifying lethality of the vampire. Instead, he roared and ordered the rampagers wandering on the cruise ship to gather. But this time, there wasn't much response. Ear-piercing roars sounded one after another from the front and back of the cruise ship. Thick smoke constantly spread out, forming a poisonous cloud. No, it should be called an antidote. Under the shroud of the smoke, those crazy rampagers stiffened for a moment. Then, under the powerful tranquilizer and the cold mist created to counter the wolfbane, everything was swallowed up. It wasn't a gentle healing, but a cruel killing. The ultra-low temperature environment and fierce poison created purely to counter the characteristics of the wolfbane gradually corroded all infected tissues into a pile of rotten meat. Even the rest of the wolf shifter who wasn't covered by the cold mist gradually stiffened. Their movements became slow and weak, as if they had degenerated into an ordinary version of zombies. In just a short hour, the terrifying plague that once ravaged the entire ship began to rapidly fade under the effect of such exquisite and huge alchemy. Paracelsus, after hiding for so long, he finally made his move. But Huaisher just glanced at it, and then withdrew his gaze without interest. Instead, he focused on the stunned Lei Feijo in front of him and reminded him with a smile. "Now it's your turn." Lei Feijo's expression suddenly changed, and he quickly retreated. "Yin, you won't be able to recover if I die." A bunch of idiots. In the shadows in the distance, Yin couldn't help but sneer when he heard the call of his ally. One was a boorish man who began to become arrogant after gaining power, and the other was an idiot who couldn't distinguish priorities. With a slight shift in the middle, they would start to bite each other. But no matter what, once Lei Feijo died, Huaisher would become difficult to control. With a demon hunter who was proficient in tracking on the ship, Yin didn't have the confidence to hide until the end. Although he hoped that both sides could perish together, now it seemed that he had to help. He pressed the wound on his chest that had finally healed, and a trace of ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. Under the silent sneak, he carefully bypassed the pool of blood on the ground that would reveal his traces. He quietly mixed in with the group of weakened rampagers and sneaked toward Huaisher's back. According to the legends, these mixed-blood dwarves and goblins who wandered in the Scottish Highlands became cruel and tyrannical because of their discriminated origins. They liked to rely on their invisible iron boots to run in the dark and use their cruel iron claws or iron spears to kill passers-by from behind. They used the blood of passers-by to dye their bonnets red. Therefore, they were called the Red Hat. Now, Yin had finally completely digested the Red Hat's memory of sneaking around. He was 100,000 times more skilled than when he first started, and he didn't leave any trace at all. But just as he raised his poison-short spear and was about to retaliate, he saw Huaisher suddenly turn around and smile gently at him. Was he discovered? The next moment, the axe fell from the sky. He retreated awkwardly, and then saw the bright light of the dagger, which cut a wound on his face and almost cut his neck. Yin came out of hiding in a sorry state. He couldn't believe it. Then, he heard Huaisher's cold voice. "Next time you want to sneak around, remove the smell of your old lover's perfume first." Yin's expression was ferocious. He held the short spear with one arm and was about to turn around and call the Leakin to kill Huaisher together. but he saw that Lei Feijo had retreated to the end of the corridor. While Huaishir was distracted by Yin Yan, he turned around and ran away. He ran away. He was stunned. He didn't expect Lei Feijo to be so vicious. But looking at Huaishir, who was walking towards him step by step with his face covered in blood, his expression began to twitch. He quickly retreated. I was deceived. It's all Lei Feijo's doing. Then get out of my way. Huaishir didn't wait for him to finish. She kicked him away, and with a swing of her axe, she chopped down the wolf shifters in front of her. She followed the trail of blood on the ground and chased after him. If Yin Yan was determined to hide and escape, he might not be able to stop him. But no matter what, Lei Feijo must die. He pressed the blood-stained dictionary in his arms and spat a mouthful of black blood on the ground. In a sizzling sound, he dragged the axe and walked step by step in the direction of Lei Feijo's escape. Since you're already here, why are you leaving so quickly? He whispered softly. In the chaos, Lei Feijo heard the footsteps behind him. His expression became more and more ferocious. Being instigated by Yin Yan to immediately take action against Huaishir was a bad move. He should have gathered more people. No, if it weren't for someone interfering, Huaishir would have been doomed today. This was his mission. Before boarding the ship, when the old beggar handed the coin to Huaishir, he knew who his mission target was. But now, he was powerless to contend with Huaishir. If he relied on Yin Yan, that swindler, he would be sold even more miserably. He must save himself first, but no matter how fast he was, the staggering footsteps still followed closely behind him like a shadow, refusing to let go. In the hoarse gasps, there was the sound of the axe blade rubbing against the floor. A straight line was drawn on the ground. In the end, he was trapped in an empty room. Lei Feijo looked at the messy room, but couldn't find any other traces. His expression twitched. After a long time, he finally understood that he had been abandoned. It was as if he had abandoned Yin Yan. He turned his head and looked at Huaishir at the door. Huaishir was also looking at him. Wait a minute. Lei Feijo's expression changed. He said with a slight hope, we're all on the same side. There's no reason to kill each other, right? If you kill me, the Holy Spirit genealogy won't let you go. You're right. Huaishir nodded. He wiped the blood on the dagger and sighed. In fact, at the beginning, I didn't want to kill my teammates. In his pocket, the blood-stained Wanderer coin was burning fiercely, glowing like lava. The Archangel glared at him. The pain that seeped into his bone marrow burned his blood. Unfortunately, Huaishir said indifferently, I was forced to do it. I still have value. I have important information to tell you. The corner of Lei Feijo's eyes twitched. He hurriedly said, You Jun. It's about you Jun's secret and another person's secret. Spare my life, and I'll tell you everything. Also, don't you want to kill the Pharaoh? I can help you. I still have a few uncontrollables. I can't. Do you still remember what I said? Huaishir raised her pinky finger and dug at her bleeding ear. She raised her red face and looked at him. She repeated her words one by one. Someone has to pay the price for this. He raised the handle of the axe and clenched it with both hands. The purple blood vessels pulsed painfully on his face, making his pale face look even more ferocious. I think that now should be the time. Lei Feijo staggered back. But at that moment, Huaishir stepped forward. As if he was shuttling through the darkness, he crossed a distance of several meters with one step. He appeared in front of Lei Feijo like a nightmare. The axe in his hand was already raised high, and he chopped down on the Leekin's neck. The time of judgment had arrived. A ferocious expression suddenly appeared on the Leekin's panicked face. He raised an arm to block the falling axe, but his left hand, which was hidden behind him, pulled out a dagger and stabbed toward Huaishir's chest. It was hard to imagine that he actually had such skills. After waiting for a long time, the Leekin finally seized the only opportunity. The instantaneous piercing was so fast that lightning couldn't catch up. It was as if the process in between had been skipped. The moment he gripped the dagger had already pierced Huaishir's heart and nailed itself to the dictionary left behind by Lily. Then it got lost in the countless fragmentary annotations between the lines and stopped there. and Lei Feizhou's arm had already been sent flying by Huai Shi's roar. Blood splattered. Then, the falling axe swung up along with the pulling of the arm and chopped off Lei Feizhou's other arm. In the severe pain, Lei Feizhou screamed and staggered back. Huai Shi stepped forward and swung the axe for the last time in the rain of blood. Chop! The iron light flashed. There was the sound of thin paper being torn. A head that still had the characteristics of a lichen flew out from the splashing blood and fell into the pool of blood on the ground, along with his corpse. Silence arrived. Huai Shi staggered and bent down tiredly, trying to prop himself up with the axe handle. But the severe pain in his body had already taken away all his strength. He slid to the ground and saw the silver circuit on the back of his hand. Punishment for breaking an oath, the silver implanted in his bone marrow burned in anger, coldly ravaging each of his tiny nerves, turning the thousands of fragmentary pains into an unbearable torrent of pain, drowning him little by little, allowing him to slowly suffocate in the dark abyss. In a daze, Huai Shi reached out with difficulty and crawled on the ground, awkwardly drinking the blood flowing on the ground. But the blood that was once full of life couldn't bring him a trace of comfort in this hellish torment. At any cost, Van Helsing, at any cost. In the pain of thirst for blood and punishment, the Archbishop's old voice rang in his ears again. Kill Paracelsus. Let the work of that blasphemer, let that deformed child who will only tarnish God's achievements, be smashed to pieces. Kill him. Kill him. The roars of countless people echoed in Huai Shi's soul, almost tearing him to shreds. He opened his eyes with difficulty and wanted to crawl up, but all he could do was flip his body over. He saw the ghost that had staggered into the room. He didn't know how to describe it. It was like a roll of broken bandages wrapped around a mutilated corpse. Like a wild beast, it crawled on the ground with its mutilated limbs, following the smell of blood. Origin substance. Origin substance. Give me origin substance. Like a mad dog, it pounced on Lei Feizhou's head that had rolled on the ground, its mutilated face chewing the flesh and blood on the head. Under the influence of the blood, its broken face seemed to have been moisturized and became radiant. One could actually vaguely make out the outline of the dark youth from before, as well as the noble pattern painted in light gold. But soon, it threw away the head that was already beyond recognition in disappointment. Not enough. Too little. Too little. Give me more. The former pharaoh slowly turned his head and looked at the vampire on the ground. His eyes seemed to be burning with the flames of lava as he slowly approached. Give me more. Huai Shi reached out with difficulty, feeling for the position of the axe. But in the midst of the intense pain, he found that he couldn't even hold the handle. He could only helplessly smile bitterly. I'm closed. Can you go somewhere else to take a look? Origin substance. Lowly commoner, give me origin substance. The pharaoh roared and opened his mouth to bite his neck. Then, in the midst of a loud explosion, his head exploded into pieces. Dried fragments and broken bandages flew everywhere. Dust flew into Huai Shi's mouth, causing him to cough violently. Even though his head had exploded, the pharaoh still didn't die. His mutilated body spasmed crazily. The body wrapped in bandages crawled on the ground, as if it wanted to escape. But then, the mutilated body was stepped on. Under the light of the halo above her head, the young girl raised the cup filled with holy water in her hand and prayed softly. The living know that they will die. A dead man knows nothing. They will no longer be rewarded, and their names will not be remembered. Their love, their hatred, and their jealousy have long been extinguished. In everything that they do under the sun, they will never be divided again. The holy water with a pure light sprinkled down. It landed on the mutilated body, like the sea washing over the beach, causing the mummy to collapse instantly and dissipate into dust. Then, Huai Shi saw the exquisite patterns carved on the barrel of the old musket, and a young girl in front of him who should have been a corpse that hadn't even turned cold yet. Lily. She was still alive. What? Huai Shi was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but want to laugh and laugh at himself. Then my revenge, wasn't it for nothing? At that moment, Huaishir heard Ai Qing's sigh. As expected, he didn't die. She murmured unhappily. The worst guess had finally come true. Congratulations, Huaishir. You've finally found your mission target. No, it should be said that on the first day, Huaishir had found the mission target's body with his luck and intuition. However, he was misled by his self-righteous experience and fell into a blind spot. Now, other than her, who else on this ship was qualified to be called Paracelsus? Is it with you? I've been looking for it for a long time. Lily bent down and took the dictionary from the vampire's arms. Looking at the cracks and the blood-stained part, she couldn't help but shake her head. You're Paracelsus, right? Huaishir asked softly. When Lei Feizhou wanted to kill me, you were also the one who helped me, right? As for my father, he passed away half a year ago. Lily squatted down, opened a bag on her waist, took out a glass syringe and needle, skillfully assembled it, and pierced the blood vessel on Huaishir's wrist. Unfortunately, if it was him, with this level of wolfsbane, he would only need a few minutes to make a special medicine, right? I still haven't learned enough. Along with the girl's words, the blood was slowly extracted and flowed into the syringe. But what was puzzling was that the blood quickly lost its color in the syringe. Countless dust-sized crystals constantly emerged from it, and then melted into the colorless blood. Only a gray sediment was left, slowly falling to the bottom. Lily pulled out the needle from the glass syringe in her hand and replaced it with a brand new one. Then, she skillfully pierced the blood vessel on the inner side of her wrist and extracted a part of the flowing blood. Then, Lily began to quickly flip through the pages, looking for the content and formula. So, more complicated changes that couldn't be seen by the naked eye emerged from the syringe. At this moment, the ordinary glass syringe seemed to have turned into a huge biological laboratory. In the blink of an eye, a series of complicated processes, such as centrifugal extraction, sterilization and inactivation, cell cultivation, and cell membrane fusion were completed. The so-called scholar was such a strange profession. People without talent couldn't get started in their lifetime. This was an amusement park only for geniuses. Chapter 145. This time, he didn't just close his eyes and open them again. The night passed quickly. Huaishir felt as if he really had fallen asleep. He was immersed in the pain of Origin's substance splitting apart. The pain brought about by the penalty of breaking an oath still lingered in his body. Even in the countless fragments of broken dreams, it was still so clear. It even shattered his connected consciousness, like a piece of iron being struck by a hammer on an iron felt. The flames of pain were reforged to ensure that this sharp tool could continue to complete its mission. But to Huaishir, it was an unavoidable torture. His consciousness endured the ravages of pain every moment until he finally forgot who he was in a daze and was immersed in those fragmented memories. In the end, he could only hear countless solemn voices echoing in the darkness. Abraham, today your hands have been stained with the blood of injustice. This will be the proof of your atonement, and also a part of your sins. You have dirtied your hands, preventing more hands from touching the darkness. You have shouldered your sins, allowing more souls to step onto the stairs to heaven. If your sins are not allowed, your redemption will be far away. What has already happened, the witnesses must be eliminated. What has already been done, the records must be erased. There is nothing new under the sun, and there will be nothing new outside of the sun. In the end, those thunderous voices echoed in his ears, as if they wanted to carve an irrefutable law into his soul. This world is the same from the beginning of time. Huaishir opened his eyes and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. His mind was completely blank. Who am I? Where am I? What am I going to do? You're finally awake? Ai Qing's voice echoed in his ears. What a long sleep. I am Huaishir. He finally managed to distinguish the part of his chaotic memories that belonged to him. The Book of Destiny reorganized everything, but he still couldn't pull his thoughts out of the chaos. How long was I asleep? 27 hours. Ai Qing sighed. A whole 27 hours. In the long 27 hours, She tried everything to wake Huaishir up, but all her attempts outside of the game were useless. The sound of dice rolling could be heard constantly. Countless complicated decisions flashed in front of AI Qing, but it was difficult to find the main point. KP smiled from beginning to end, quietly admiring her gloomy appearance. He held the character card Clement in his hand, waiting for her to surrender and give up. As long as she was willing, the game could restart at any time. If Huaishir didn't wake up, AI Qing didn't even know how long her meaningless persistence could continue. But persistence was actually meaningless. When KP revealed his trump card in front of her, she knew that perhaps her struggle all this time had already ended in failure. While she was pondering, she suddenly heard Huaishir's voice. AI Qing, are you hiding something? She frowned subconsciously and looked at KP, but KP just smiled and played with his dice. He just shrugged slightly to express his innocence. Your instructions are too few. Huaishir said, if it was in the past, you wouldn't have let me mess around even if you kept silent, right? AI Qing was silent for a long time and just said, I'm thinking. Do you have a result? Yes. AI Qing replied unhappily. The result of thinking is that it's the same as the reality outside. Most of the time, thinking is useless and will only hurt you. I don't have a way to solve the current dilemma. To be honest, I also want to provide you with effective suggestions that can solve the problem, but I'm afraid you won't like it. She paused and unwillingly lowered her eyes. It's up to you to decide how to complete your mission. Huaishir was stunned. My mission? Paracusal? Didn't he die half a year ago? AI Qing shook her head in pity. You'll understand soon. At that moment, Huaishir's expression suddenly twitched. He felt the crazy, killing intent emerging from his heart and the uncontrollable heat and thirst in his chest. It was the thirst for blood and death. Because he saw Lily, his heart was beating wildly, as if it was about to burst. A large amount of hormones was secreted uncontrollably, making him fall into an indescribable state of madness. It was as if he had become a beast. He convulsed violently, raised his hand, like an epileptic, and struggled to get up. If it weren't for the fact that his limbs were weak at the moment, he might have jumped up and tore her throat. What's wrong with you? Lily looked down at him in astonishment, reached out, and opened his eyes. She lowered her head and looked carefully. Breathing difficulties, pupil constriction, arrhythmia. Are they side effects that haven't been recorded? A soft breath blew on his face. It was like the wind in hell. It made his canine teeth slowly grow, and purple-black capillaries appeared on his pale face. It was so ferocious. Don't be afraid. Lily lowered her head, took out the syringe from her waist bag, and the set of alchemy instruments left by Huaishir. She moved quickly, and soon, the colorless medicine was injected into his carotid artery. Don't worry, it's just some tranquilizers and mixed serum. Lily reached out to feel his body temperature and said softly, maybe the poison in your body hasn't been cleaned up. This will probably make you feel better. No, Huaishir gasped with difficulty. The bone-deep killing intent was quickly diluted by sleepiness. His convulsing limbs gradually calmed down. As the purple-black network on his face faded, Huaishir regained his calmness again. In other words, he was finally able to suppress the uncontrollable, crazy, killing intent in his heart and forced himself to calm down. But countless thunderous roars still lingered in his consciousness. It was like an iron commandment, constantly bringing the violent shock of whipping and the burning pain of thunder. Kill her. Must kill her. Must kill Paracelsus. But that old man died half a year ago. Huaishir roared in his heart. I've been looking for a dead man for half a year. The mission has been completed long ago. But he still left something behind, didn't he? AI Qing's voice sounded, and it was so compassionate. Think carefully. Huaishir, Abraham Van Helsing's mission, is it really to kill Paracelsus? Think carefully. Find that person, follow that person, and then kill that person. In a trance, the majestic and old voice sounded in his ears again. At all costs, let the blasphemers work. Let the deformed child who will only tarnish the achievements of God be smashed to pieces. His work? Yes, his work, AI Ching said softly. The only work left behind by the alchemy grandmaster who is known as the creator of the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone? The embodiment of miracles in the human world, the omnipotent crystal, the elixir of immortality, the combination of countless wishes and the will of heaven. One of all. One of all. It was not only used to describe level 5 ascendants. Since ancient times, this existence had been given high hopes and expectations by countless people. From the beginning, it was the peak of miracles that was almost impossible to achieve. When the harbingers became a thorn in the side of the church, and creationism and evolution theory gradually became incompatible, what other work would be crowned with such a lofty title? In his torn consciousness, Huaishur thought with difficulty, and finally felt the loneliness and pain as if he was facing an infinite darkness. It was as if he had finally experienced AI Ching's powerlessness. Think, Huaishur, think carefully. Don't tell me there aren't enough clues left for you. Think, experience the pain when I think. You'll understand the only truth. Lily. In that instant, Huaishur murmured in disbelief. She was created by Paracelsus? Is there a second possibility? AI Ching asked in return. It clearly required many expensive materials to be compatible with the soul attribute to create, but it became so easy in her hands. It clearly required various formulas to create a precious potion, but as long as she drew a little of her own blood, she could successfully create it. She clearly looked mature, but sometimes she acted in such a childish way. Paracelsus had clearly died long ago, but when Huaishur realized the connection between him and Lily, such a violent killing intent emerged. In his heart, uncontrollably. This is the final truth, Huaishur. AI Ching sighed. In front of you, the young scholar Lily, registered as hell, is the most outstanding result of Paracelsus. Just her existence completely overturned creationism, a miracle that pushed evolution theory to a whole new level. The Philosopher's Stone born from the flask, a soul created out of thin air, not bound by the rules of day and night reincarnation, day and night, an artificial human. If it was a false life, it would be impossible to welcome the second morning sun. If there was no soul, it would be impossible to ascend from the tributary of the Silver Sea and become ascendant. If there was no compassion and kindness in the heart, it would be impossible to become a believer in the Holy Spirit pedigree. An artificial thing had life, an empty shell was given a soul, and a heretic became a believer of many Holy Spirits. No matter which of these 3 points was related, the Holy Spirit pedigree would not allow her to live until the next morning. She must die. As long as she lived, it was a denial of creationism, the church, and the gods. This was the original sin she was born with. The child of original sin created by Paracelsus. Bingo! KP applauded in admiration and expressed his appreciation without any reservation. You are an excellent investigator, Ms. AI. Congratulations, you have solved the hidden puzzle of this module, the death of Paracelsus. Chapter 146. Bingo! KP applauded in admiration and expressed his appreciation without any reservation. You are an excellent investigator, Ms. AI. Congratulations, you have solved the hidden puzzle of this module, the death of Paracelsus. He paused for a moment and revealed a mysterious smile. If you can complete the secret mission, after clearing the module, I will give you an additional reward. Believe me, it will not be inferior to the fragment of the Philosopher's Stone. In this regard, AI Ching did not feel the slightest bit of joy, because this was the mission that Abraham Van Helsing could not escape from. Completely strangle this miracle. In the silence, Huaishur stared at the ceiling in a daze for a long time. He looked at Lily's back as she operated the alchemy equipment and suddenly whispered, "If only I had discovered it earlier." AI Ching sneered at such weakness. Would have been easier for you. I don't know. At least I can lie to myself that everyone who boarded this ship deserved it. You can also lie to yourself now. This is just a game, a piece of history. No matter what you do, no one will pursue the record. Yes, Fleischer closed his eyes. This was just a record of the past. This was not even something that really happened. It was just a game built with the fragment of the philosopher's stone, just like what he did in the past. He should have been used to it. As long as he pulled the trigger, everything would be fine. Regardless of whether the people in front of him were old or young, they were already dead, and it had nothing to do with him. This was just a game, but he could still grow. How beautiful. But when Fleischer looked at Lily's back, he did not know what to do. Her back was facing Fleischer. She was defenseless. She concentrated on adjusting the ratio of the potion in the crucible, focused and relaxed, as if she was in her own home. She softly hummed a song from an unknown place in her throat. Fleischer was almost certain that this was not an illusion like the second body, but a real hole. He did not even need an axe. As long as he pulled out the flying dagger that was close at hand, he could completely end all of this. His fingers twitched. In the end, he retracted his hand weakly. I can't do it, AI Ching. Fleischer sighed dejectedly and lowered his eyes tiredly. If I kill her, I'm afraid I'll become the kind of person I hate the most. If he killed Lily here, then what was the difference between him and the instructor who massacred an entire village for an insignificant reason? What would happen to the person who is angry and sad because of this? To kill his past self? Perhaps AI Ching would tell him that this was growth. The so-called growth was to deny the past self. Fleischer never minded denying himself. However, he could not imagine how he would face Lily, who was lying in a pool of blood. Would that pair of pure eyes regret trusting Fleischer in the end? Anger? Sorrow? Or was it the kind of serenity that calmly accepted everything in the end? If it were you, what would you do, AI Ching? I would probably hesitate, just like you. AI Ching replied calmly. But in the end, I think I would kill her. I want to save myself. No matter what happens, I have to live. Fleischer was silent. Do you want me to give you an order, Fleischer? AI Ching asked. It's like I ordered you to spare Qi Yuan's life. I ordered you to kill her. If you want, I can do that. After all, this is the relationship between us. You're in charge of the operation, and I'll take care of the rest. The so-called supervisor is used to do this. You don't have to worry about it. Fleischer did not speak again. Then, Fleischer, I order you. AI Ching made a cruel voice. Finish your task and kill Lily. Wait a minute. Fleischer subconsciously opened his mouth, but at that moment he finally understood. See, only when the coin falls, you know which side you want. AI Ching sighed and lowered her eyes. I won't give you any more orders, Fleischer. You have to make your own decisions and face the consequences. But is this really okay? Across the table, KP smiled and asked. He doesn't even know that this decision is related to your life. No, it should be said that you have been confusing one point from the beginning to the end. AI Ching raised her eyes and looked at him. Even if he doesn't complete his task, as long as he can set foot on the new world, it means that the module has passed. If he wants to live, he doesn't have to kill Lily. It sounds like that. I don't deny your conjecture. KP shrugged. Unfortunately, I thought you would be more straightforward and decisive, more like the person I saw in the file. People always change, don't they? AI Ching retorted coldly. Besides, you want me to force him to kill Lily. That's your real purpose, KP, right? KP was silent for a moment and slowly nodded. That is true. I don't see fairness in your game. At least, there is no fairness in your rulebook. You need to understand this. This is just like justice. KP revealed an ambiguous smile. It will occasionally be late, but occasionally it will also be absent. But not this time. AI Ching stared at him and told him firmly, as long as I'm here, it won't happen. I'm looking forward to it. KP smiled. He threw the dice in his hand. The game continued. Lily's medicine was effective. At least, the large amount of tranquilizers inside was effective. The present Fleischer could barely restrain the surging killing intent in his heart and carry out some weak activities. Like a patient who had been lying in bed for a long time, He walked around the narrow cabin and carried out some rehabilitation activities. In fact, there was no need. As long as there was enough blood, vampires could quickly recover their health. For Lily, artificial blood was a piece of cake. It was even apple-flavored. As for the effect, although it was a little lacking, it was at least better than nothing. Huaishir had already recovered 60% of his strength. But because of his chaotic thoughts and the uncontrollable killing intent in his heart, he didn't know how to face Lily. After the initial thanks, he didn't say anything else. He just sat alone in the corner, holding a pen and writing in the Book of Destiny, trying to clear his thoughts. But soon, he found that this didn't do any good to the irritation and anxiety in his heart. In addition, there was one more thing he didn't tell AI Ching, because he found that the holy mark of a believer was extremely similar to a ghost. No, if he looked at it chronologically, a part of the core of a ghost came from a believer. It was just that the two were diametrically opposite. The former selflessly shared this favor with a pure source of piety, while Huaishir was a negative energy generator. And now he had become a vampire, a negative energy absorber. It was like walking on the road of the abyss to the end. So, how many parts did Crow use to assemble the holy mark of a ghost? No, it should be said that in addition to the holy mark of a believer, how many miracles were related to the abyss pedigree? How deep was the water of the abyss pedigree? At this point, Huaishir was no longer the silly boy who didn't know anything. At the very least, he understood bits and pieces of it. In this world, there was no miracle for no reason. The real miracle wouldn't suddenly appear, suddenly come, and suddenly disappear. In other words, no pedigree appeared out of thin air. There must be a reason. So, where did the abyss pedigree come from? Or was the Astronomy Association really powerful enough to create a non-existent holy mark pedigree with their bare hands? This was more terrifying than Paracelsus creating an android with his bare hands. After all, there was only one Lily, but a pedigree could exist forever and be transmitted to tens of millions of people. Each pedigree could be said to be the foundation of the world's axis left behind by the gods. Now that the gods were dead, the Astronomy Association's move was no different from creating a group of gods with their bare hands, and they had also obtained the approval of the world's axis. Was it possible? The more Huaishir thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He rubbed his eyebrows in annoyance, and then he noticed Lily's cautious gaze not far away. As if sensing the irritation and depression in Huaishir's heart, she didn't disturb him. Instead, she flipped through the dictionary in her hand and secretly looked at him, thinking that she was very covert. Noticing his gaze, her expression froze for a moment, and then she became calm, as if nothing had happened. Ahem, she asked, "Are you busy?" No. Huaishir shook his head. He didn't know how to tell her. But she had already come over and curiously looked at the messy words that Huaishir had recorded in the book. After finding that she couldn't understand them, she looked at the scribble that Huaishir had casually sketched in annoyance in the corner. Then she froze. Who is this? She leaned closer and looked at the mocking and arrogant face in the notebook. With just a few strokes, the cold and cruel eyes were so vividly depicted. He was opening his mouth as if he was about to spit out vicious words. It made people feel uneasy. Huaishir didn't know how to explain. In the end, he could only say, this person is called Brother Ravenfly. Then Lily understood. Beelzebub? Probably. Huaishir wiped the sweat on his head. He likes to make people eat shit. What about this black man? Lily asked. He looks very confused. Yes, he's very confused. Huaishir added 3 question marks above the black man's head. What about this? This is a frog called Pepe. Why does it look so sad? I don't know. Huaishir sighed. Probably because it's very painful to live. That's a pity. It looks quite cute. Lily shook her head regretfully. Like a little doll, but Hohenheim didn't like it. He even threw away what I made. Really? Huaishir was silent for a moment and shook his head. He shouldn't have done that. Well, when people get old, they probably have a bad temper. But when they lose their temper, they regret it and apologize to me, hoping that I'll forgive him but I've never been angry with him. Lily curled up in the chair and sighed softly. He was very panicked before he died, as if he was hiding from something, but he never told me. After giving me this ticket, he passed away. In the end, he didn't allow me to call him father. In the silence, Huaishir hesitated for a long time and reached out to touch her hair. I believe that in his heart, you're more important than anything. Who knows? Lily shook her head. Everyone's heart is hidden in their chest, and no one will see what's inside until they die. Hohenheim told me to learn to protect myself, but I don't even know what to guard against. How can I know what other people are hiding in their hearts? Yes, Huaishir responded dryly. Feeling the almost boiling, killing intent in his chest, he couldn't help but want to vomit. He felt disgusted by his hypocrisy. Well, speaking of which, he stiffly changed the topic. How old are you this year? I mean your age. Well, let me think. Lily didn't seem to notice this. She lowered her head and began to write and draw quickly in the notebook. Huaishir leaned over to take a look and then felt dizzy. In the middle of the various long numerical calculations, there was a simple diagram of the movement of the planets. It was as if she was revising the calendar. Even calculating age was so hardcore. Soon, Lily finished the calculation. 4.5 years old. Huaishir was stunned. 4.5 years old? Sister, are you kidding? Huaishir looked at her mature appearance in amazement. Even if we are of different races, you should at least be an adult, right? My physique is not the same as the average person. Lily seemed to react and stiffly avoided the question. I'm 17, Huaishir replied. Lily's expression instantly became disgusted. Liar, but your bone age is already 38 years old. I can only say that due to various reasons. Huaishir sighed. He felt that he sighed more today than in the previous year. He had no idea how to introduce himself to Lily. After all, he was now Van Helsing. Abraham Van Helsing. He was the executioner of the church, the vampire hunter, and the murderer who came to kill Lily. Just as he was deep in thought, he heard Lily's cheerful voice. Look, I've also finished drawing. What did you draw? Huaishir lowered his head and then spat out a mouthful of water. Just below the title page of his dictionary, there was a vivid panda head emoji, but the face was empty, because I don't know what emoji to draw. Lily scratched her head in distress. I feel that no matter what I draw, it can't surpass your drawing. That's because my drawing is the crystallization of the wisdom of countless people. How can you compare to it alone? To be able to draw an emoji in the year 1620, it could only be said that it was a fresh experience that Huaishir had never imagined. Amidst his messy thoughts, he heard Lily's voice. Huaishir. At some point, the girl had turned in front of Huaishir. Her eyes blinked and were full of expectation. I just thought, why don't we travel together after we reach the new world? Anyway, I have nothing to go to. You have nowhere to go, right? And I can make blood for you, so you don't have to worry about finding food anymore. Huaishir looked at her blankly. He didn't know how to answer. Can I? Lily asked. No, it's good. Huaishir shook his head stiffly and asked dryly. Do you have anywhere you want to go? Yellowstone, how about it? Lily thought for a moment and suggested, I've always wanted to go to Yellowstone. It said that there are many geothermal springs there, and there are lions and elephants. What about you? I don't know. Huaishir lowered his eyes, and his voice was a little hoarse. I haven't thought about it yet, so let's talk about it next time. I have to sleep for a while. Lily was stunned for a moment and nodded. She returned to her workbench and continued to monitor the progress of the potion. But after a long time, she couldn't help but look back at Huaishir, who was leaning against the bed. Am I bothering you? No. So, she breathed a sigh of relief and asked nervously, We are friends, right? Yes. Huaishir lowered his eyes. We are friends. That's great. Lily smiled happily, like a child, ran over, and gave him a gentle hug. Huaishir didn't even have time to react. Then you sleep. I won't disturb you. She realized that she had lost her composure, took a step back, and picked up her dictionary. When you are free, let's talk again. Huaishir looked at her blankly for a long time and closed his eyes. Damn it. Looking at the defenseless girl with her back facing him, Huaisher reached into his arms and grabbed the cold handle of the dagger. He quietly pulled it out and stared at the pair of scarlet eyes reflected on the dagger's blade. Then, he threw the broken toy to the side. F***CK, the church. F***CK, Van Helsing. F***CK, everything. Old. Son. No. F***CK. F***CK. Enduring the pain of anger in his heart, Huaisher raised his head and breathed a long sigh of relief. He smiled. Lily, how about I teach you how to draw a crying cat's head? Okay. When it was about evening, there was a commotion outside the door. After a while, someone gently knocked on the door and asked if there was anyone inside. After they opened the door warily, the person outside the door smiled and brought good news. America was about to arrive. Thanks to the turmoil, so many people died. The speed of the ship was unbelievably fast. Not long ago, there was a witch on the ship who was good at astrology, who calculated the distance between them and America. If they maintained this speed, they would reach the New World tomorrow morning. Everyone would be able to obtain freedom and relief. Therefore, someone proposed to hold a banquet to celebrate. At this moment, the gloomy and depressing atmosphere on the ship had been swept away. Everyone looked happy, with a warm smile, gentle conversation, and elegant behavior. It was as if they had been reborn. For some reason, Huaisher's heart couldn't help but sink. Yesterday's turmoil and disaster didn't seem to have left any traces on the ship. The story continued. It was developing towards the predetermined ending. He lowered his head and only saw the end of the chapter that slowly appeared on the Book of Destiny. A line of large black words. To be counted no. Chapter 147. Why do they all look so happy? I don't know. In the corner of the restaurant, Huaisher looked at the happy faces and slowly shook his head. Was this freedom in sight? Or was it the joy of arriving in a new world? It was like the TVB saying that after this trip, they would go to Canada, where no one would know them, and they could start new. With the approach of the new world, everything in the past was thrown to the back of their minds. So they were reborn. This long journey of suffering was about to come to an end, so it was time for the final celebration. The originally messy restaurant had been cleaned up, and under the collective efforts of the group, it was rearranged. In a jubilant atmosphere, everywhere was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. The purified food was carefully cooked and served on the table for the guests to use. The unlimited amount of alcohol was taken out from the warehouse, and several tall champagne towers were piled up, reflecting the sparkling light. The survivors who had changed into decent clothes raised their glasses to each other and greeted each other politely. There were even a few people on the podium who formed a small band, playing a melody that was neither unpleasant nor pleasant to the ears. Some people even invited Huaisher, but Huaisher refused with the excuse that he was not feeling well. He just sat in the corner of the restaurant. Looking at all this, he only felt that it was ridiculous. It had only been 20 hours since the chaos of the wolf disaster, but all the suffering and uneasiness seemed to have been thrown to the back of their minds. It was as if there was an invisible force faintly leading all of this, and then everyone's fate was back on track. You can call it the gravity of the plot. All of this was originally a record left in the fragment of the Philosopher's Stone. A.I. Ching said, "It's like a calendar with all the schedules written. No matter what happened in the past 2 days, the things that have been set will not change." A.I. Ching's words made Huaisher's heart sink again. Although she didn't say it directly, there was no doubt what she meant. Even if there was a huge degree of freedom, this was still a record drawn by KP from the Philosopher's Stone. The past history. Just like history would not change, what happened on this ship would not change. Just like the identity of the people who boarded the ship in this banquet. And the final result. In history, who on this ship reached America? No one knew. There were probably tens of thousands of ships flying the Mayflower flag from all over the world heading for America. But how many of them actually made it to America? The more joyous and peaceful the atmosphere was, the more uneasy Huaisher felt. It was like sitting on the crater of a silent volcano, feeling the heat rising up from below. Even if it looked peaceful for the time being, there was no telling when the magma would erupt and blast them out of the stratosphere together with their skin and bones. But Lily seemed to be having a good time. Anyway, she had never seen anything before. Ever since Parathussel created her, she had been wandering around with her, living a precarious life as a vagrant, not to mention attending a banquet. This was a completely new experience for her. Even the deaf man on the stage was listening to the tug-of-war cello with great interest. Fleischer wished he could rush up and beat up the broken thing playing the cello. It was simply torture. Your right hand is weak, the score is not good, the technique is loose, the rhythm is slow, none of your movements are decent. When Fleischer couldn't stand it anymore, he was already standing on the stage, looking down at the guy, playing the cello, frowning. "Who is your teacher? How can I let you go on stage with this kind of performance?" The guy who was foolishly playing the zither looked at Fleischer in a daze. After staring blankly for a long time, he obediently handed the zither to him. "Watch carefully, learn well." Fleischer picked up the bow and played the Beethoven No. 5 for him again, then raised his eyes and asked, "Have you learned it?" The people next to him shook their heads. Only Lily below the stage was clapping her hands excitedly. Anyway, she couldn't tell whether it was good or bad, but she thought it sounded good. Fleischer suddenly felt powerless and stuffed the bow back into the guy's hand. "Forget it, pretend I didn't say anything, you continue." Seeing his helpless look, Lily kindly comforted him. "Don't be depressed. Although you were a little worse than him, it is already very good." Fleischer spat out a mouthful of blood. Until now, he just realized that Lily seemed to be tone deaf. "Okay, whatever you say." Fleischer was speechless. He picked up the glass and continued to drink the tomato and apple-flavored artificial blood that Lily made for him. He had to admit that this kind of nutritious meal was simply disgusting. Couldn't she make something normal? However, she was in a state of resistance to all non-experimental alcohol, and Fleischer's rare opportunity to taste foreign wine was gone. Just as the two were talking, he noticed a crisp sound coming from afar. It sounded like a slap in the face. He looked up and saw Yin, whom he hadn't seen for a long time, and a big red palm mark on his face. Papaya, who had been coldly looking at the group of tourists, was angrily scolding him. Soon, she went directly to the balcony outside the restaurant. The one-armed Yin now looked very embarrassed. Sensing Fleischer's gaze, he coldly looked at him and turned to leave. "That guy's up to no good." In this regard, AI Ching commented without pity. Since childhood, that guy likes to pretend to be pitiful to gain sympathy, and then secretly do things when no one suspects him. His second brother and sister have been tricked by him many times. "I only have one question." Fleischer hesitated for a long time, and his heart was full of curiosity. "Is your house a tiger's den? Isn't that what the so-called big families are like?" AI Ching said indifferently. "From the moment of birth, the competition begins. Whoever can win the favor of the old master will have more status and more money." "Well, I should be glad that I'm an only child, right? Do you want me to follow him?" Fleischer rubbed his hands, looking for a chance to beat this grandson up. "If he knows that you saw him, he will definitely hide immediately. You won't be able to find anything even if you follow him." AI Ching said, "Just raise your guard. Also, pay attention to his old mistress. She and her brother always give people a feeling that something is not right. Moreover, there is no place for them in the American genealogy of later generations. They probably died on this ship. I'm afraid there are still risks lurking in the dark. You should be careful." Hearing this, Fleischer looked out of the window at the balcony. Just between the row of seats with parasols, next to Papaya, he saw the old man in the wheelchair. As if he was still in the late stage of Parkinson's, Koth was still holding his soup bowl, sipping the spoon and the thick soup in the bowl. His white hair, which was almost falling off, swayed slightly in the wind, revealing his scalp with scars. His trembling movements always made people break out in a cold sweat, making people wonder if he still had the physical strength to travel. But from beginning to end, his eyes were quietly staring at the front of the ship. It was as if he could see the vast land thousands of miles away through the deep barrier between the border and the present realm. His expression was so focused and solemn, like a child looking forward to a new home. Look, Yaga, he whispered softly. That's America, our new home. Brother, my home is not there. There are only savages, war, and people abandoned by Rome. Yaga answered in a hoarse voice. Unexpectedly, this time, she did not go crazy or angrily scold her brother. As if she was tired, she just leaned on the chair and stared tiredly in the opposite direction of her brother. Why did you bring me here? She whispered to herself. I'm not like you, brother. I don't have such great ambitions and aspirations. I'm just a crazy woman who wants to die as soon as possible. America is too far away. I just want to go back to my chickenfoot house, but my Bobby is dead. I have no place to go back. Then don't go back. Koth raised his voice and coughed as if he was angry and growled. Don't miss the land that abandoned us. Yaga, put away your outrageous look. If you're angry, get angry. If you're not happy, get angry. Don't be a joke to the gods who abandoned us. But what's the use of being angry? Can it make you change your decision? Yaga looked up at him, her eyes sad. I don't want to go to America. I just want to stay in Siberia, my house. My dead daughter's grave and my husband's grave. Everything I am is there. There, I am Barbara Yaga. I am a witch. I am an abomination. But what am I when I leave Slavic? Yaga covered her face tiredly. I'm nothing, brother. I'm nothing. I can only be a crazy woman. A pretty face can make me lose my mind. A sweet talk will make me forget myself. What else can I do? Tell me, brother, what's left of me? Koth panted heavily and stared at her. But at least you're alive. We still have hope of climbing the mountain again. Don't people like me deserve to die? We deserve to suffer in hell. In the deepest place. Yaga could not stand his daydreaming any longer. She choked back her sobs and asked, Why do you force a damned witch to accompany you in your search for salvation? Brother, tell me, shouldn't we have died a long time ago? Listen, my sister, don't be bewitched by that damned gigolo. What does a clown know? Do you want to be controlled by a toy? Koth stared at his last relative and told him word by word, Yaga, people always need a new beginning. No, we will have a new beginning. Don't dream, brother. Please, at least don't be like them. You know the curse. You've always known it. You're just talking in your sleep, but you can't even fool me. You can only fool yourself. Yaga interrupted him angrily. Her voice was hoarse and desperate. She did not know how to wake her brother up. Koth's expression became angry, and he panted heavily. He opened his mouth to speak, but then he coughed violently. His face was red. In the end, he was almost suffocating. Every time the two of them argued to the end, he would end up like this. Yaga stared at his face, not knowing whether it was because he was too weak or because he wanted his sister to retain a little gentleness and pity for her dying brother. You're too despicable, brother. Yaga shook her head in disappointment. You've always been like this, always. She took out her magic medicine pot, picked up Koth's soup spoon, poured a drop, and poured it into his mouth. But this time, the usual dosage could no longer bring about the miraculous effect. Koth was still in pain. She was stunned for a moment and panicked a little. She kept pouring the magic medicine down Koth's throat. It was not until half the pot was gone that Koth could barely breathe again. But after a moment of relief, his face turned pale again. As if he was enduring some kind of pain, countless purple blood vessels appeared under his loose skin, crawling on his body like vines. He widened his eyes in shock, clutched his chest, and gasped violently. I feel, not so. He suddenly spat out a mouthful of dark blood and said with difficulty, Not so good. Crack. There seemed to be a cracking sound from his body. He was stunned for a moment, and then seemed to understand something. His expression suddenly became shocked, and in the end, it became indescribably ferocious. He looked at Yaga, who was in a daze. What did you give me? My medicine. No, my medicine shouldn't. Yaga looked down at the bottle in her hand, and her face was pale. But then, she could not help but scream. Koth had stood up from the wheelchair, and his skinny arm suddenly reached out and grabbed her neck, angrily lifting her off the deck. Bitch, give it to me. Drink it. What? I swear. I don't know. Yaga cried in horror and screamed. I don't know anything. Really. At that moment, Koth's face completely turned into a beast's. So ferocious. In the engine room of the warehouse, hidden in a dark corner, Yin seemed to have heard the chaos in the distance. He could not help but sneer and look down at his pocket. The strange potion that could prolong the life of the living and bring the dead back to life was now hidden in his pocket, in another inconspicuous bottle. The potion in Yaga's silver bottle had been replaced by the terrifying weapon that the Red Hat brought on board the ship, the Water of Styx. This was why everyone was at grade 3, and he was the only one at grade 2. It was also what he relied on to complete his secret and kill Koth. No, if he used it well, together with the Red Hat stealth ability, he could even kill anyone on the ship. Ever since he boarded the ship, he had been holding back, waiting for any opportunity to kill Koth. But he found that under the appearance of an idiot, the old man was full of vigilance. There was no chance for him to make a move. Except for Yaga, who protected his life, he did not trust anyone on this ship. Beneath that seemingly frail appearance, there was a dark essence that terrified him even to this day. It was as if thousands of souls were imprisoned in Koth's body. He cruelly squeezed the souls sealed in his body and absorbed all of their power to prolong his life. If this power was released, who knew what kind of disaster it would cause? But now, it had nothing to do with him. Once the Water of Styx entered his stomach, Koth would die without a doubt. It was not an incurable poison, but a miraculous creation that was extracted from the depths of the Silver Sea. If the ashes were the essence of a life's death, then the Water of Styx was the sediment left behind by the decay of a soul. It represented the decay and destruction of soul. Anyone who drank a drop would age their soul by 1 year. The amount he poured into Yaga's bottle was enough to kill a grade 4 ascendant in an instant, not to mention Koth, who did not have much time left to live. Today was the day the undying Demon King met his end. He did not win because he was a hero, but because his own life was coming to an end, and he had accomplished his mission perfectly. All he had to do was hide and wait for everyone on this ship to be reduced to ashes by Koth's final struggle. In the end, he would reach the new continent and become the only victor. He suppressed his excited smile and raised his head. Then he saw the tall and sturdy figure standing in front of him without him noticing. No, rather than tall and sturdy, it was more accurate to say that the figure was enormous, like a giant. Yin froze in place. "Sorry, I forgot to ask you before I came in." A hoarse and mocking voice came from under the hood. "May I come in?" Yin looked up at the figure in a daze. He tried to back away, but a tentacle-like limb suddenly shot out from under the hood and wrapped around his leg. "Since we were once teammates, I don't want to be too rough. After all, we can't do what we want." As he spoke, the figure slowly twisted his neck and took off his hood, revealing a familiar face covered in scars. He smiled at Yin. "Can you give me the potion in your pocket?" In that instant, Yin's face shrank as if he had seen a ghost. "Why, is it you?" Then darkness came. The peaceful banquet came to an abrupt end amidst a hoarse scream. The sound of the music was cut off. Everyone turned their heads in a daze and looked at the violently changing figure on the balcony. It was as if he had suddenly expanded. From the old man's shriveled body, a large piece of flesh suddenly swelled up, followed by another large piece. They were like living creatures that were swimming under the loose skin, causing Kosish's body to change rapidly. Sometimes it was tiring, sometimes it was beastly. In the end, countless tumors and deformities had uncontrollably appeared on his hunched body. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a monster made of mud. He barely maintained his original shape, twitching and struggling. Chapter 148. "Yaga, save me, save me," Kush screamed hoarsely, his voice rising and falling. "I'm in so much pain." Yaga's face was pale. In the end, she shook her head stiffly. "I can't save you, brother. You're hopeless. Liar." Kush roared, his deformed face full of anger. He grabbed Yaga's neck, his deformed fingers tightening like an iron clamp. "You actually wanted to harm me. You actually wanted to kill your only brother. You be *TCH. You." Yaga's face was pale, and she could not breathe. She could only look at her crazy brother in despair. Soon, She let go of her hand weakly and gave up struggling. But then, she was pushed to the deck angrily, vomiting blood and almost unable to breathe. At the last moment, Kush let go of her. "Look, my dear, look what you've done," he staggered back, his body melting into layers of mud, piling up on the deck and spreading everywhere. "I originally wanted to protect you. We could escape to America together." His twisted face was full of pain and madness, leaving a trail of muddy tears. After I leave, what are you going to do?" Yaga looked at him blankly and did not speak. But Kush staggered back a step, turned around, and looked at the stunned passengers. Huaisher was familiar with the fierce look in his eyes. At least I'll let you." At that moment, killing intent erupted like a tide. "Let's go." Huaisher did not care about anything else. He grabbed Lily and ran out of the restaurant. Then, a black tide gushed out of Kush's mouth. Huaisher only heard the sound of glass shattering behind him. Then a dark storm, torrential rain, and flood poured into the restaurant with a sharp whistle. It covered everything. In the blink of an eye, the fake peace and joy were torn apart so easily. In the storm, everyone felt a tremor that shook their souls. Then, the rain and sticky black flood hit him in the face. The black sludge was mixed in and shot out like bullets. In an instant, a large number of souls were harvested amidst the screams. Then, the sticky sludge fell to the ground, and vague figures struggled to climb out from it. Like the evil spirits in hell, they grabbed at everything that could move around them, pulling them inch by inch into the seemingly bottomless black mud. In the blink of an eye, countless strange silhouettes appeared. Hunters with bows and arrows, armored soldiers, ferocious-looking priests with scepters, and even women who looked like banshees. The gates of hell opened with a loud bang. The sins and souls that had been imprisoned within the cage flew out of Kush's open mouth and hovered in the air, as if they wanted to devour everything. "This old ghost wants to self-destruct." Huaisher was dumbfounded. "Is he crazy? What are you thinking? Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. Even if someone wants to harm you, you should go look for them. Why did he have to drag an entire ship with him?" But there was no time to investigate these things. The souls that Kush had unleashed were all the ascendants that he had swallowed before, but hadn't digested. It could be said that they were a stockpile that had existed for nearly 1,000 years. Apart from the terrifying legends, Kush was most famous for his ability to manipulate souls. Apart from hiding his own souls in other places, he also liked to devour defeated enemies to transfer his aging and injuries. Now that he was about to die, he naturally didn't need these things to extend his lifespan. He simply unleashed them as an AoE attack with terrifying effects. Those who had been able to withstand his digestion and survive until now were either darkness descendants with powerful backgrounds or famous heroes. None of them were easy to deal with. Under Kush's influence, the origin substances that these people had left behind had already been soaked in darkness, turning them into complete lunatics. They were like wild dogs that had been released from their cages, biting anyone they saw. A storm of blood was about to erupt. Fortunately, Kush really was too old. He was so old that he almost couldn't lift his blade. If he had been at the peak of his strength, he probably would have been able to swallow the entire ship in an instant. Considering that a starving camel was still bigger than a horse, no one could say for sure how much strength this old ghost had left in his body. To be safe, they had to make preparations first. In the midst of her mad dash, Huaisher frantically tore off Lily's pouch. She didn't bother to differentiate between what was inside and what was inside. She grabbed the syringe that Lily had made beforehand and stabbed it into her neck without even looking at the label. Needle after needle, his neck was about to be turned into a sieve in just a few moments. All kinds of messy medicines mixed together and spread wildly in his blood. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying medicinal effects mixed with the scorching pain caused his eyes to turn red. The weakness that had wrapped around his limbs finally dissipated. Lily stared at him, dumbfounded. "What are you doing?" "Taking medicine." Huaisher's hands didn't stop moving. "Trust me, there's nothing wrong with taking medicine right now. I don't care about the side effects." Lily was stunned. "But those are blue ones." They're sleeping pills. Huaishir stared blankly for a moment, then stuffed the blue bottles back. He argued stubbornly. It's fine as long as they're medicine. Let's not think too much about it. Strong stimulants, willpower awakening agent, recombinant fusion protein, silver blood medicine, strong artificial plasma. A series of medicines were injected into Huaishir's neck without blinking. The purple capillaries on Huaishir's face became more and more obvious. The blood vessels on his forehead pulsed wildly, as if they were about to burst. In the midst of the chaos, Huaishir's hand trembled, and half a tube of holy water was poured into her body. Her eyes almost popped out of their sockets as she screamed and spat out a bloody mist from her mouth. She had almost purified herself. After taking medicine like crazy, Huaishir could feel the poison in his veins rising. Fortunately, he relied on this pile of medicine to get rid of the weakened state. He recovered about 80% of his combat strength from the punishment of the oath debuff. He sped up, but just as they were trying to avoid the dark rainstorm on the deck and hide in the cabin, they saw the originally tightly shut door open with a loud bang. The pitch-black flood gushed out from the door, sealing them in the corridor. A hideous face emerged from the dripping mud. They could vaguely make out Kush's features. Wait, Huaishir didn't wait for him to speak. He raised his hand and explained, "Old man, we have no grudges in the past or in the present. Why do you have to lies?" Kush roared. His voice swept over like a storm. The terrifying dark wind instantly corroded a layer of Huaishir's face. Countless pieces of skin and flesh grew rapidly. It looked extremely tragic. "I recognize you. You're with that pretty boy. That pretty boy. Where the hell is he?" I'm not. Don't talk nonsense." Huaishir hurriedly waved his hand. "Look at my handsome face. How can I be the same as that gigolo? Vampire." In the black mud, countless voices burst out. It was unknown whether they were laughing or screaming. An assassin of the Holy Spirit lineage actually says that he's innocent. At that moment, Huaishir jumped up, took the hand axe from his back, and chopped at that rotten face. In midair, he smashed a bottle of holy water on the blade of the axe. Thus, in the dark wind, the hand axe soaked in holy water glowed brightly. The blade of the axe whistled through the air. In an instant, the distorted face in the black mud was smashed into pieces. Since they were going to fight, there was no point in talking. Looking at the black mud surging behind the cabin door and the countless figures struggling to get out, Huaishir was so angry that his eyes turned red. It was a mistake not to have killed this scourge Yin earlier. Then, the sound of paper being torn rang in his ears. AI Ching said, "Yin has left. F*CK so fast?" Huaishir pulled Hila and ran in another direction. "Who did it?" "I don't know. In theory, you're the only player left in this game. But I think this might just be a smokescreen released by KP." Staring at the empty table in front of her and the smiling KP, AI Ching asked calmly, "Other than me, there's at least one other player, right?" KP asked back, "How do you know? Otherwise, wouldn't this game of yours be too boring?" AI Ching looked around indifferently at the empty chairs around her and said calmly, "From the beginning, you've separated us, haven't you? You were able to hide the fact that you communicated with me more than once. Why can't you help others hide their situation? Not to mention the sound of paper being torn. Now, it seems that not only in the game, sometimes even on the card table, it's just an illusion." KP raised his eyebrows happily. "I have to say, your guess is very correct. As a reward, let me think." KP pondered for a moment before snapping his fingers. Instantly, opposite AI Ching, a black figure appeared, but the silhouette and face could not be seen clearly. It was not even clear whether it was a man or a woman. However, there was no doubt that the person was smiling, and it was towards AI Ching. I didn't expect that in the end, the first two investigators who noticed the cognitive impairment would stay. This is really beyond my expectations. I'm starting to look forward to the final result." KP chuckled. "However, before that, it's best to think about how to survive this disaster." At that moment, Huaishir saw that on the ceiling above his head, countless fireproof sprinklers suddenly burst, and black mud spewed out from them. As the mud fell to the ground, countless figures struggled to crawl out from it and blocked in front of Huaishur. Roars and roars. On the entire cruise ship, there was no safe place. Is this really an old man who's too old to walk? Huaishur looked at the terrifying scale, dumbfounded. He's clearly about to die. How can his life be so tough? No. Lily stared at the struggling black mud with pity and said softly, I'm afraid Kush is already dead. The terrifying darkness that shrouded the entire ship at the moment was just the embers left by the Demon King. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.